suggestions that it was closing near the end, but obviously he pulled it off, partly because of some of the things that you're talking, the opioid epidemic there and his response to it. So, yeah, I mean, Republicans obviously feeling good about this one, going into it a little nervous near the end. Democrats were a little hopeful, but he ends up winning in this state.
And Sununu is obviously a brand name.
Exactly.
In New Hampshire.
100%.
His brother was senator. His father was governor.
100%. So that is going to give us a little bit more of the picture of who gets to decide the congressional districts. That's why we're following these governor's races as a setup for what happens in 2020. Who decides the districts gets a lot of say over the map. So let's look at the big wall now and look at how we see this state of play. In the House, 221, 199. 28 pickups so far for the Democrats. 15 seats remain open. We're watching them in real time. The headline already known. Thank God for the women on the Democrat side. If that's what you were following tonight, if not for the women who won races for that party tonight, you would not be in the position you're in right now. If you're a Democrat, that's the story for you. That's who you're going to thank when you see these headlines. The U.S., the Senate side, very different story. And they see themselves getting a comfort cushion there that is fueling the president's feelings that he did historic gains tonight on the Senate side. So what are we watching in terms of House seats? Let's go over to Phil Mattingly. There are a lot of races that aren't just close, but are like within 1% close, right? So one of the races that we're looking at is Georgia 6, right?
Yep.
And there's been a development there. So let's start on that race.
Let's set it up first. There's now 15 outstanding races.
Right.
That's why you only see a little bit of color here. Democrats are leading in 7 of them. Republicans are leading in 8. Democrats have very real pickup opportunities across those races. You talk about Georgia. You talk about Georgia 6. Take a look at this right now. Lucy McBath up 1,400 votes over Karen Handel. Again, this was the special election. This is what every Democrat was keyed on, and they lost that race. This race came online late, and right now, Lucy McBath, who again became kind of a national figure at some point, Democrats felt very good about her and her candidacy. Weren't sure she could actually get it over the line. 100% reporting. This race hasn't been called yet. 100% reporting. Lucy McBath is in a great position.
Closest race in the country right now?
No, it's actually not the closest race in the country, and I'm going to tell you why. There are a lot of very close races out in the country right now. Let's go back into New Jersey. We've been waiting for this one all night. Tom MacArthur, 97% reporting, 2,000 votes ahead. Still haven't called that yet. Andrew Kim was trying to take out the moderate Tom MacArthur. That's still up in the air right now. So there's still a slim chance for a pickup opportunity there. Let's start moving across the map a little bit. We've talked about this. This isn't really that close anymore. This is opened up, 100% reporting. Ben McAdams looks like he's on the road there in Utah. Let's go over to California because there are a lot of close races in there. This race, Jeff Denham opening up a little bit more of a lead right now, about 1.2%, 1,200 votes ahead. Again, Josh Harder, considered a top-tier Democratic candidate. Can he close the gap? 88% reporting. Still an open question. Move down. This would be your closest race. Steve Knight, 330 votes ahead, the Republican incumbent over Katie Hill. Again, Los Angeles County, the demographic shifts as people have left the city area and moved out into here over the course of the last couple of years have been major. Steve Knight has always been targeted by Democrats. Katie Hill was considered a top-tier Democratic candidate, raised a ton of money, really thought they'd give him a run for his money. 50% reporting. She's giving him a run for his money. It's a question of what's going to end up happening with this race. Go back down and check back in on Dana Rohrabacher. Right now, Dana Rohrabacher losing to Harley Rouda, the Democratic challenger, by about 2,700 votes. He's opening up a big enough lead right now to actually probably end this thing at some point if this holds 99% reporting. Basically, what I'm saying right now, Chris, is if you look across the map, there are still tight races out there. And on top of that, there are still Democratic pickup opportunities out there to expand that lead. We've called 221 seats for Democrats. You see right now Democrats are leading in 7 of these remaining seats with the opportunity perhaps in a couple of other races to get back and play too. You're looking at 228, 229, 230. That's what Democratic strategists have their eyes on right now. Can some of these really tight races that are still in Republican hands actually move forward? I actually want to point out one more because this was interesting. This is a Democratic-held seat. This was Tim Walz. He ended up running for governor.
This is the closest one in the country, or no?
No, it's not. We already went through the closest one. That was California 25. What I'm interested in, mostly because I'm a nerd, is this was one of the few seats that Republicans banked as a potential pickup that was held by a Democrat. Tim Walz, the incumbent, left this seat to run for governor, won that governor race. This was a district President Trump won by 15 points. Jim Hagedorn has run multiple times for Congress. They thought this might be his chance. Look how close this is. 581 votes. Republicans only had a very minute number of pickup opportunities. This was a crucial one, and Democrats are hanging in right now in this district.
So we got 15 seats we're watching there. 7 of the races are within 1%. And on the Senate side, we have a projection right now. Let's go to Dan.
That's right. In the U.S. Senate, CNN can project Angus King will go on and serve another term in the state of Maine. Angus King is an independent. That's why it is purple. But he caucuses with the Democrats. So we're going to give that to the Democrats when it comes to the balance of power. So let's look at the overall numbers. 45 for the Democrats, 51 for Republicans. They have 2 pickups so far, but 4 seats remain. And several of those are really big battlegrounds, Chris.
We always like to add a little bit of personal details to people as we go through the races, give you a little kind of feel for the texture. 2 things about Angus King. First thing is, in his pocket at all times, he has a card to explain global warming to people and what carbon monoxide emissions do. Is always in his pocket. He's always handing it to people to help them understand. Second thing is, you almost never see the guy with a tie on that doesn't have lobsters on it, because he's from Maine. I made fun of him about it once, and he sent me a tie that had lobsters on it. I reported it. All right, so Matt, when we're looking at the map now, having Angus King in there is important because after all of this readjustment, and now that we see we are truly a divergent electorate, right? We're diametrically opposed and moving in opposite directions. We see that on the Senate side as we get more and more of the raw votes. We're going to see in the areas where Trump is strong, the numbers are really strong, high 50s, even 60% approval. Where he loses, he's getting crushed in the suburbs. It's a party realignment on both sides, and it's getting more and more entrenched. And then you have a handful of people like Angus King, who is a true independent. Now, he does caucus with the Democrats often, but he's a deal maker. And they're going to be at a premium right now.
I think the question becomes, particularly with the expanded Republican conference, which could grow by 1 or 2 more in the days ahead, depending on what happens in Montana and Arizona, is whether or not Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell feels like he actually needs to make deals with Senate Democrats because he's expanded that conference. Now, the interesting element there, Mitch McConnell will have no choice but to make deals with whoever the House Speaker is, and if that's Nancy Pelosi. But to your point, the interesting element, I think, is everybody's been so focused on the very few Republican moderates because they've been everything, whether or not they can actually get a majority now. And will there be working groups? Will there be people? You talk not just about Angus King, but it's kind of in that mold. You have a group of senators, both Republican and Democrat, sitting in kind of the mid-40s range that are very, very frustrated about where things are going. They would be the people who would want to make a deal. The other element, too, is the 2 states that are still outstanding could produce people that would be in that. Jon Tester is often considered one of the individuals in this room. Look at this right now, 78% reporting. Let's look at what's still outstanding here. Again, Matt Rosendale, 6,500 votes ahead. This is what's interesting to me, right? Look what's still outstanding. What's still 82% reporting or less. These are 3 blue counties. Now, in Montana, you're not going to get huge numbers of votes. Obviously, in total right now, you're looking at a little bit over 325,000 votes. This, the fact it's still out there, is a big deal for Jon Tester. Earlier in the night, it looked like this was 100% reporting. This is now 67% reporting. Missoula is Dem country. This is blue country in Montana to the extent it exists. Look at the margin, 28 points right now. Again, 22,000 votes total in this county, but that's a couple thousand votes there that Jon Tester can pick up based on this margin. So again, you're talking, look at the top line. Matt Rosendale, 6,500 votes ahead. If you're Jon Tester, where are you going to get votes? If Missoula's still got outstanding vote, Missoula's still got 33% outstanding vote, you're picking up a couple thousand votes there if you're Jon Tester. Move over to another county, Great Falls. This is the 5th biggest county in the state. Again, not a huge amount of vote, not a huge distance here, but 10-point margin right now. You can actually move up, pick up 1,000 votes or 2 there. Go to Gallatin County. This is the 3rd largest county in the state, and look at that margin, 21%. What I'm saying here is people right now have been talking over the course of the last couple hours that Matt Rosendale is right on the verge.
Right.
And there's no question that Jon Tester was in trouble in Montana. This is the outstanding vote right now. These are blue counties with outstanding vote. Jon Tester still has a path. It might be a slim path, but Jon Tester definitely still has a path. I want to go down to Arizona as well and check in where that is. This has been kind of static for the last couple of hours. Let's look at what's the outstanding vote here. And what does it mean? There are 2 places where there's outstanding vote. You have Pinal County, it's 5.9% of the vote. Martha McSally running up a big lead here. Not a huge amount of vote, 82%. She can bank on a couple more thousand votes probably coming from here. Now move over to Maricopa. This is everything at this point in time, right? And this is what we're waiting for, and this might be what takes a couple of days to come. 60% of the state comes from here, 87% reporting. Kirsten Sinema still has a little bit of an edge. If she can expand that edge, she could be in a really good place.
She's got a shot.
But the big question, though, is this is traditionally a county that Dems always get a little bit close on. and then end
not
up falling
enough.
short.
Yeah.
Can she not only hold that lead but expand it a little bit? That's what gives her the opportunity, and that's what we're going to be waiting on maybe for another 24 hours.
And for people who are trying to figure out what the story of the night is, this is kind of a metaphor race. You know, the role of women coming into the dominance role, having ideological diversification, having firsts that will go along with their races. If Sinema is able to win, you'd have the first openly bisexual person going into the Senate. Martha McSally wins, you're going to have your first woman from this state as senator. And you're seeing that a lot tonight. The role of Trump in this race and what Martha McSally has promised the constituents there and her ability to work with Trump. These are all themes that we're seeing all across the country, and we've got a long way to go. We've got a handful of Senate races that are going to matter in terms of mandate. And the House, 7 races within 1%, 15 races still too close to call. So please stay with us. We'll continue our coverage.
The House Speaker, and then you go on and on. Let's look down the line here, but I just want to bring it to the panel. The president is tweeting tonight what he said, a tremendous success or whatever.
Yeah, I got it.
Of that nature.
Tremendous success.
Tremendous
Thank you to
success.
all.
Thank you to all. But I wonder if he realizes what he's up against, with, especially with all these committees. One of the people he demonizes a lot, or he talks about a lot on the campaign trail, is Maxine Waters. She's going to be over the Finance Committee. They're going to be talking about finance, money dealings, and on and on and on. And also Elijah Cummings is going to be on the Oversight Committee, and I know you've been speaking to him.
Yes, I've been talking, texting with Congressman Elijah Cummings all morning, and he says some of the first things that he wants to deal with as head of Oversight and Government Reform are issues that affect people on a daily basis, like the issue of pre-existing conditions, as well as housing issues, the census. But, you know, I talked to Mark, and we were kind of like trying to figure out, you know, where's this going? And then we drilled down on it with him about the investigations in Russia. And he says he wants to reach across the aisle and talk to people, a bipartisan effort, because this is very serious. He says when it comes to issues of subpoenaing, he wants to be very delicate but yet serious with this, but he wants to have a bipartisan effort. But he did talk about Russia, but he wants people to understand that he is going to deal with issues that affect them daily.
So that means that the president is going to be under complete scrutiny for
1 bazillion percent. But just remember, this time.
Is that a technical?
It might be 1 quadrillion percent, but
It's 4:16 in the morning.
But think of this time where we sit right now. It was about this time when we called President Trump, or it was a little bit, you know, we're a little bit later now, was going to be president of the United States. So it was in the middle of the morning. And during that speech, he talked about how he was going to work in Washington and get things done together, okay? What we're hearing from Elijah Cummings and what we heard from Nancy Pelosi tonight was very carefully worded statements. We want to work. We want to be bipartisan. We want to do this. We want to do that. But the bottom line is they're going to go out and they're going to take a baseball bat and they are going to like knock down the White House door with subpoenas.
I just want to hear the two-shot of the 2 Republicans we just got here.
Mark doesn't look too happy.
Well, he's not in the White House anymore.
But still.
What do you think?
I think that it'll probably be pretty excruciating, but I think it's also going to be politically beneficial to the president in the long run. Because
Do you think there will be any sort of legislative victories coming?
I do think there will be, actually, Don. I think that infrastructure, I think, stands a very likely chance because there's going to be a lot of Democrats running in the same Midwest states that the president won, where the president will be on the ballot, and they'll be able to say, look, I don't like his rhetoric, but I need to be able to show that I can work with him on some issues.
Look at the face. What?
Well, I think he's right that infrastructure will be an area they'll collaborate on. Also, pharmaceutical pricing. I believe that the president he's talking sort of price controls. The Democrats are doing the same thing. I think they'll make common cause on an issue like that. But beyond those issues, I'm not sure what they're going to agree on. Remember that Nancy Pelosi did say, I mean, she was asked about impeachment and, you know, how if they controlled the House, this is recently, if they controlled the House, what would they do? And she said, look, impeachment she said this to Dana Bash, who I think is still awake. She said impeachment, I think, I'm going to the other studio. Impeachment can be a sort of lever, a pressure point to get other things that we want. Because that's another, we were talking earlier about Pelosi and what she's done. But I do think there is, without question, and Simone may be able to speak better to this, honestly. But I think there's an element within that Democratic caucus that wants the day that Congress is sworn in, get the articles of impeachment out there. And she has been consistently opposed. So she's got to navigate that water and figure out, okay, can we use it as a lever, or do I need, if I want to be the speaker, do I need to make a promise
that's going to come up.
I've
will
heard
say
others.
there
Hold
is
on,
a
hold on,
small-
hold on. I've heard others say earlier on CNN, they expressed this sentiment. Why would Democrats want to work with a president, and especially with folks who have not wanted to work with them for the past 2 years? But go on.
So I think folks need to understand what Democrats actually ran on. Democrats across the country, these folks that flip seats, these red to blue candidates, ran on putting a check on the president. They did not run on being the resistance
That's right.
to Donald Trump. They ran on putting a check on him. They ran on holding him accountable. They ran on exercising the oversight that, frankly, their Republican colleagues did not run on. So there is, though, a contingent in the House of Representatives, even some new folks, that do want impeachment. And I think what you'll see with members, particularly folks like Steny Hoyer, Nancy Pelosi, even some members of the Congressional Black Caucus, they have said previously that impeachment is not what, if we win the House, what the American people necessarily sent us here to do. But if there's credible things that come out of the Russia investigation, if there are things that bubble up to these oversight investigations, and it is a tool.
All right, that all sounds good. That all sounds good. Let's get to the bottom of this. Let's get to the bottom of what everyone wants to know. Are they going to get the tax returns? That's what everyone wants to know.
They're going to put, but Elijah Cummings is not going to be the one to do that. But they're going to go after the tax returns.
Ways and
But also, you've got issues of the emoluments.
That's going to be Richard Neal.
Yeah, emoluments issues, conflicts of interest violations, executive gag orders, and also listening to what the whistleblowers. So this is not going to be easy.
Yeah.
And this is before you get into impeachment.
He's
But
not
I mean,
gonna
if
give
you
up the
go
tax
out
return
and
easily.
you talk to voters around the country, beyond the activist Democrat side of things, they do not want impeachment right now. They do not want to be having that conversation.
People want
they
checks
want
and
a
balances,
discussion.
though.
They want checks and balances.
checks and
but they want a
balances.
discussion about pocketbook issues, particularly health care. And I think that much of this, the reason why you're seeing Pelosi's caution tonight, is because they will overplay their hand at their peril for 2020. And this is exactly the foil that Donald Trump would like to have if Democrats go too far.
I've got 20 seconds, Mark.
I just want to be the moral authority here and say, as the father of a 13 and 14-year-old, I look at what's going on in this country right now, all kidding aside, and it's pretty awful. It's pretty awful that both political parties can't get together, that we really have no leadership in this country right now, and there's a lot of
I have
problems.
something really important I need to talk about because coming up, we're going to tell you where it's legal. It's going to be legal to smoke pot.
House of Representatives. 221, 199. That means 28 pickups. However, 15 seats remain open. There are 7 races in the country right now within 1%. That's why you got to go slow and you have to see what happens, and you can't call races too soon, so we won't. On the Senate side, a very big story tonight. Republicans have opened up a bigger lead. 51-45, 4 seats remain. Each one of these has major implications, but it's not all that's going on tonight. We've been following the governor's races. That has big implications for 2020, who gets to draw the districts. There are also ballot measures that give us a window into the shaping of culture in our country. And one of the questions on there is Don Lemon's favorite. Where in the country can you legally smoke marijuana? For that, we go to Jessica Dean. Jessica, what do we know?
Well, hi, Chris. All right, let's answer that question for you right off the bat. We go to Michigan, where voters there overwhelmingly said that they will vote to allow recreational marijuana. 56% of voters there saying that's going to be what they want. So 82% reporting right there. There's also a marijuana initiative on the ballot in Utah. Now, this is medical marijuana. That's the differentiation here. Again, voters approving that measure, 53.2% to 46.8%. So those are the 2 marijuana initiatives we were following tonight. The others, expanding Medicaid. We go back to Utah here, 54% in Utah saying yes to expanding Medicaid. We also take a look in Nebraska, where they said yes, 53% to 46.7%. We know that health care was a major issue in a lot of people's minds. And in Idaho, overwhelming 61.4% saying yes to expanding Medicaid in Idaho. So, Chris, a few of those we're keeping our eye on as we go into the morning.
You know, look, that's an important referendum measure. It's also going to be instructive in terms of who gets to be the governor there, because those governors can make decisions about health care and expanding Medicaid that can offset whatever happens on the federal level. Jessica, thank you very much for that. Let's bring in Don Lemon. I hear that you have something you want to say about the Medicaid expansion?
Which one of those 9 states you're moving to where it's going to be legal to smoke pot?
I don't know what you're talking about. You know, Sanjay Gupta says that medical marijuana is a big part of the wave of the future. I stand with science.
I'm not talking about medical marijuana. I'm talking about recreational, buddy. Don't even try try to pretend. It's 4:28 in the morning. Let's go there.
Listen, I'm happy that you can still tell time.
All right, I'm not gonna embarrass you because I'm sure there are lots of things you don't remember. Your short-term memory is gone. Now get back to work.
I will. Thanks,
If you
Don.
can remember your name.
Always
Cuomo,
good to see you.
Christopher.
See you later. Make them go away. Make them go away. Just like my dreams. All right, so when we're looking at this, the point of every time I see Don,
You can't do that
laugh.
here because we're actually physically here.
Yeah, I know. It doesn't work. I go like this.
No,
nothing
not gonna
happens.
work.
So I got a lot of questions tonight early on in the coverage, which was, of course, excellent. And bravo to all of you for what you were doing with it. And people were saying, so you're looking at the governor's races because you're trying to get a sense of who could run in 2020. And that's logical. I get that. But that's not the biggest impact, right? And these referenda, that's interesting because you're going to see healthcare policy. It was huge for the Democrats. Now that they're in control of the House, they're not going to let it go. The Republicans have themselves in a corner on pre-existing conditions. They went after it, then putatively say, oh, no, they'll save it in the laws, but now they just joined the lawsuit on the federal level. So they've got trouble there. It's trouble for Trump. These governors can make decisions about expanding Medicaid even easier in states where it's done by referendum. That's important. How do you think that's going to play in this alchemy of where we go next? What do they work on? What don't they? How big a chance do you think healthcare is the new horizon?
I mean, that's a great question because the Democrats in the Senate in particular, and the House as well, they really tried hard to run on health care. And if you look at the exit polls, the people who supported the Democrats put that as their top issue. It was overshadowed, if you look at the results in the Senate in particular, by other issues, namely immigration, which was named by Republicans as their top issue. Probably not a surprise since the #1 Republican, the commander-in-chief, was beating the drum big time on that issue, and because they felt like it is a winning issue. So I don't know how much health care is going to continue to be something that they talk about in the near term. In the longer term, meaning in the next 2 years, legislatively. 2020, you bet.
That'll be tough.
That's all they're talking about
Right.
as they try to, as they begin to fight amongst themselves, the Democratic field, on the question
Right.
of how far to the left to go.
Yeah, look, if they can fall in love with incrementalism, and I know that there's different political cost-benefit analysis on that, and I know Don may accuse me of spending too much time in Michigan where they just passed the referendum for even having this idea, but if you can marry yourself to incrementalism, you see horse trading on the two issues. So on the Republican exits, you see immigration. Was that because Trump was pushing it so much, or is it because they have bona fides interests in that issue? We don't know. We'll see. That'll suss itself out quickly. But on that side, you're going to have to do something about how people are held on the border, okay? You have this caravan that's going to be here at some point. You have others like it. You have emerging issues of large-scale movements from Central and South America this way. Not being able to deal with families effectively is a problem. The Flores settlement, we've talked to you a lot about it and what it means, that you can't treat kids like adults. That's true. However, it puts a time collar on us to process cases as a government, and it doesn't work. So there's a deal to be made there about what we were talking earlier, moving this process outside our border, working cooperatively with Mexico. That means it stinks that we don't have a great relationship with them on this level right now, but also to allow families to be kept together. So that's an incremental one-piece, non-comprehensive immigration deal, but you could do that. You could marry that on the health care side with doing something on pre-existing conditions. You could do something on pre-existing conditions. The ask from the Republican side will be that you got to help us with short policies and catastrophe policies. You got to let us be able to let
I
states
love that you're
sell
talking
short
like
policies.
an actual legislator.
Yeah.
Because this makes sense in
I've
the
spent a
era
lot of time talking to these guys
No,
about
but
this.
it makes sense in the era of Ted Kennedy and John McCain, and when Orrin Hatch would do deals with them. That kind of stuff happened because it is the art of legislating. You are being optimistic, like I was earlier, that something
You
like that.
shamed me a little bit, and I felt like I had to change tone.
It's okay. It's worth it. I mean, it's worth it because this is actually really important. This is the way it used to work. It didn't always work, but sometimes there was. I mean, horse trading is looked at as a negative, but it's not. It's legislating, and
True.
Where can we come up with?
Those are
you
two
give,
easy areas.
You give some, I'll give some, but that means you have to shun the bases.
Right, but that's maybe what Nancy Pelosi's dream is, but that is not what the Democratic base wants right now. Their energetic base that came out and helped them win the House doesn't want that. They want an impeached president. They want everything to be a referendum on him. They want Democrats to make him pay, essentially. They want the subpoenas. They want the investigations. They want the oversight. They want all of that. So maybe Democrats do think that they should be able to compromise on that, but whether or not that's what their base wants, that's something they're going to have to work on. Separately, I do think the immigration part has been a big trial balloon for 2020. President Trump went really hard on that, of course, with the Senate races. We saw that have a much different effect there than the healthcare did in those House races, where we saw all these Democrats run on really hyper-local issues. They ran on healthcare. They ran on that. They tried not to bring President Trump into it. Meanwhile, in the Republican races, we saw that they tried to tie themselves to President Trump and make it more of a national issue. That worked in Indiana, Tennessee, Florida so far. There are a lot of places where that didn't work. So the question is President Trump going to take this same immigration message we saw for the last 2 weeks, where it got to the point where he's saying he's going to be putting out an executive order this week, which still has not materialized, on asylum changes? Are those real things that they're going to try to do, or is that just something he was throwing at the wall to see how it would work? And is he going to try to do that again? If he proposed so many changes right before 2020, is he going to try to do it again?
Right, and it sort of begs the question of, does he really want to fix it, or does he want to just point to this as a problem to
Well, if he
keep
puts out
getting
an
up
executive
his
order,
base?
it's proof that he wants to continue the fight.
Yeah.
Because he's got zero legal basis for it. It's not going to work. If he tries to do birthright citizenship that way, if he tries to change legislation that way, the hypocrisy of what they did with DACA and Obama aside, legally it's not going to get done. All right, let's take a quick break. We have races to update you on in the Senate and in the House. We ain't done yet.
What's your takeaway, Mark, from this?
Takeaway is that, again, it's a historic night for Nancy Pelosi, but I think it's a very significant night in the Senate for Republicans. I think it is going to be very different in getting confirmations, not just potentially with new picks in cabinet, but also judicial. And I think that in the governor's races, Republicans did better than was expected.
And on impeachment?
On impeachment, I don't think Democrats will be able to contain themselves. and the reason for that, Don, as I share, and the congressman, I'm sure, can give you perspective on this. In 2013, I don't know one elected Republican who said it's a good idea to shut down the government. Yeah. But their base was so animated and frustrated that they felt like Republicans need to stand up to Obama. Yeah. And I think Democrats will be in the same place.
Congressman?
Well, look, the takeaway tonight is tale of two waves. There was a Democratic House wave and a bit of a Senate Republican wave. Let's face it. And I would tell you, too, what I've seen tonight, too, the red areas of this country got redder, the blue areas got bluer, and the purple areas in the suburbs got a shade bluer. Yeah. That's my takeaway.
Go ahead.
Look, I think Democrats delivered in the House. They defended all of their gubernatorial seats, picked up additional gubernatorial seats, and really made gains in state legislative seats across the country, and not to mention a number of ballot initiatives. And so while I would never thought that we were going to take the Senate, I thought we'd be able to hold it a little bit better than what we did. But I think it's a good night for Democrats. And going into the conversation about the next Congress and a presidential primary, I think it has to be focused on the issues. And you have to look at the coalitions that came out to elect this diverse group of candidates that was led by women. And what does the base want? And the base wants some health care.
Were you surprised by anything, Kirsten, the number of women?
No, I wasn't surprised because I think there were so many women running this time, actually. I mean, that's what's so remarkable, and that were really spurred by Donald Trump. But there were a lot of firsts, and I wrote down some of them. We have two of the first Latina congressmen. Marsha Blackburn is the first female senator from Tennessee. We have two Muslim women, one is a Palestinian American, first Palestinian American, first Somali American. We have two first Native American women. We have I don't know if the race with Young Kim has been called yet, but that could potentially be the first Korean American woman in Congress. So there's been a lot of, there's a lot of firsts, and it's an exciting night for that.
I would classify it this way: a blue wave when it comes to the Congress, and a red wall when it comes to the Senate. And actually, Republicans picked up more seats in the Senate than I thought they were.
So let's talk about the Senate because it's a little bit more manageable. If you look at what we thought were going to be the most vulnerable seats on the first day of this election cycle, you would have said for Democrats, Missouri, North Dakota, Indiana, Montana, and West Virginia. Why? Because those are the 5 states that Donald Trump carried by double digits. At present, Democrats have lost Missouri, North Dakota, Indiana. They won West Virginia, and they're behind in Montana.
So what are you saying?
It's tribalism is all. That what we expected is what happened. What's the one state? The one state that Hillary Clinton won that was represented by a Republican senator, Nevada.
Yeah.
Dean Heller loses. I mean, in some ways, it's really, really predictable. We are further into our pockets of tribalism than we might have even thought. Now the House
I was surprised by all the consternation, especially earlier in the evening among all of the pundits saying, this is, oh my gosh, I'm so upset, and this is exactly what pretty much what they said would happen. Democrats would win seats in the House. Republicans would win some seats in the Senate. There are always upsets in every race. Were you surprised by the consternation? What's your takeaway?
Well, my takeaway, basically, I wasn't paying attention to other people. I was just looking at the polls because the polls kind of led us astray the last election, in the presidential election. They were right on when it came to the House. And this president knew that he was going to lose the House. But he is safe, but yet he has to go into that regret area and soften his tone. He's safe in the fact that, yes, the House could impeach him, but he's safe by the Senate because he cannot be removed. If they can't convict him, he will not be removed because it's Republicans. But then also he has to listen to the will of the people. The people spoke out. They want change. They want to be included. The new people, the new numbers that have come into this game or realm of politics, he has to pay attention to.
Yeah, Mark, we've talked about whether there's going to be a blue wave or a red wave or whatever, but this is a way our democracy is supposed to work. Now there's a check on the party that is in power now, and isn't it supposed to be that way?
Well, it's supposed to be that way in the sense that
we're supposed
to have the opportunity to vote and put that check in place if we so choose to do so as an American people, and we have so chose to do so tonight. I mean, that's what we saw over the last 24 hours and in this midterm election. I think, though, when we're looking at tonight, though, let's just look at what's going to happen later today, what's going to happen down the road. And really, nothing's going to happen later today or down the road.
I mean, tonight,
The end.
Good night, everyone.
Tonight, Van Jones talked about it being a rainbow wave, and I do think that's the most interesting thing that has come out of tonight on both sides. Young Kim on the Republican side, but the fact is that you had so many younger and minority voters coming out. I think the question as we go forward is looking on the Democratic side among the 2020 candidates, who can stitch together that coalition of millennials and women and voters of color? Who among those candidates can do it? And I think it's going to be a fascinating two-year debate that we're about to enter.
Well, I will say this. If you thought it was crazy and there were ups and downs in the past 2 years,
buckle up.
You ain't seen nothing. You ain't seen
We're only
nothing.
727 days away, Don, as I reminded you. 727 days away from 2020.
Yeah.
That's really
But
starts
why don't
now.
we start counting?
Hey, listen, we're still not done. Actually, there are still races that are uncalled, and we need to check on those right after this break.
All right, 18 seats remain open, 14 on the House side, 4 on the Senate. Let's go through them very quickly with Phil Mattingly. What do you see?
Let's start with still outstanding, and that's Montana. We've been waiting all night to see where this is going to end up. Matt Rosendale now up by about 4,600 votes. So again, the question, as it always is where's the outstanding vote, and can Jon Tester find a pathway to actually winning this race? So there's 4 counties that are still outstanding, less than 90%. Let's look at where they are. They're all blue. Tester has a little bit of vote to get here. Not a ton, but a little bit. Pull out a little bit. Check in Great Falls. Again, this is a place he's winning by almost 10 points. Still not a ton of vote. I think the bigger problem here for Jon Tester, Missoula, this is dim country. This is where he's opened up a 30-point lead, only 73% reporting. There's pathways here, too. The big question right now, with 4,000 votes behind, is can he actually rack that up? Again, 4,000 votes in Montana is a pretty good number of votes.
Yep.
Right now, when you look at these counties, these are Democratic counties, but there's not a huge number of votes there. Jon Tester has a pathway, I think. When you talk to people and when you look at this map right now, it's just not a big pathway. So I think the big question now is, where does the rest of that vote come in throughout the rest of the night? Let's move down to Arizona as well. Martha McSally currently holding a 14,000 vote lead over Kyrsten Sinema, the Democratic challenger. Where's the vote outstanding right now? Pretty much all right here. And that's a problem for Kyrsten Sinema right now. 82% reporting. Martha McSally has a lead of about 17 points. That's a problem if that's the only outstanding vote. We've been waiting on Maricopa almost the entire night, where Kyrsten Sinema still holds a lead. But the lead right now, less than a point, 99% reporting. If this is the only county that's got major vote outstanding, that's a problem when you look at the top line, even though Kyrsten Sinema is outperforming what Democrats usually do in Maricopa County. Let's move over to Florida.
Close is only good in horseshoes. So here we are in Florida.
Hand grenades as well.
This is, that's right, but not races. All right, so we've been watching this one, but not calling it. Why?
And again, to the frustration of a lot of Republicans, including, I'm sure, Rick Scott's camp, here's the reason why. Look at this number, the differential right here. In Florida, in the state of Florida, in a statewide race, there is a recount triggered automatically if it's within 0.5 points. That is currently within 0.4 points. The other issue here is the outstanding absentee ballots. As we talked about earlier tonight, just have to be stamped by today, which means it will take a couple of days to actually count them. That might put it out of recount range. The reality is, for our decision desk and for CNN, we want to make sure all votes are counted. We have a full understanding of the universe of things before we call a race. That's where things stand right there. That's why Florida remains uncalled. Let's move over to the House real quick, just because I've been nerding out over these California races over the course of the last...
True, but we're 227, 208 right now.
Yep.
And how many open races do we have?
We have 14 open races, and I think the big question throughout the night was what was going to happen in California. If they were going to bolster their majority to 230, 232, what's outstanding right now? Democrats thought they could pick up maybe 4, maybe 5 seats here. This one looks like it's about to go on the board. Mike Levin, the 49th District, 5,000 vote lead with 85% reporting. That's in pretty good shape. Let's check out on Dana Rohrabacher. Right now, Harley Ruda, 2,700 vote lead with 99% reporting at this point. He's in pretty good shape as well. Bigger question, though, if you're a Republican, you knew how many districts were at risk here. Look at this. Mimi Walters, 6,000 votes ahead, 99% reporting. That's great news if you're a Republican. There's not a ton of great news if you're a House Republican tonight in the House Republican Campaign Committee. You feel good about that. Move up one more. Again, you talk about new members of Congress, Young Kim running to replace her former boss, Ed Royce. She's with 88% reporting, up by 5,800 votes. She looks like she might be on her way to replace her boss.
And she'd be the first Korean-American woman in Congress ever.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. There's a couple other very close races in California, but I want to check in on another one that we've been waiting to come in throughout the course of the night. Right now, Washington 8, this has not moved for a while here, but Kim Schreier has opened up an 11,000 vote lead. This is a district Democrats have been targeting for years. Dave Reichert is the retiring Republican in this district. Democrats always thought they had an opportunity to take him out. Somehow he always survived. The most fascinating part about this district is it's the classic suburban-rural divide. You go into this area right here, all suburbs, very anti-Trump, very resistance. Move over here, all rural, very red. Both parties thought they had very good candidates here. Clearly, Democrats leading right now, but also a clear pickup opportunity. Again, what we're talking about here is not whether Democrats have the House. They have it. It's what the margin is going to be. And Chris, when you look at California and you look at Washington, it's clear Democrats have more opportunities. It's just a question of how many they're going to cash in.
How much of the vote is in this race? Do we know?
No, we don't. We don't have that target right now.
It's
mostly early vote at this point.
So we'll see. Because I was going to say, this is a bigger cushion than we're used to seeing on these races, but we don't know how much of the vote is in either. Phil, thank you so much. All right, look, I know that it seems that, boy, you guys are dragging this out. You have to, because if you get one wrong, it's a mistake you don't want to make. And a lot of these races, 7 of them on the House side, are within a 1 percentage point margin. So you got to take it easy. Stick with CNN. When we come back, we'll give you an update on where everything stands right now. All right, we're going to have continuing coverage throughout the morning. One of the big questions is how many of us came out? How many of us voted? Well, we have numbers for you right now. 88% of the vote is in, okay? And you'll see we have 96 million people. But remember, 12% still to come in. You see the margin there. That's going to be relevant. But how does this size up? In 2014, you had 83.3 million people, so we're ahead of 2014. The 2016 presidential election, you had 136 million. What's the record for a midterm? In 2010, we had 96 million people. We're already there, and we still have 12% to go. So good for you for getting out and vote. Our coverage continues. My thanks to this panel. Let's hand it off to New Day right now.
This is CNN Breaking News.
Good morning to our viewers in the United States and all around the world. Welcome to New Day. It is Wednesday, November 7th, 5 o'clock here in Washington. You know, I say good morning, but it's still election night, frankly, and what a night it has been. Mixed messages in the absolute extreme, giving both parties really something to cheer about. But in terms of the biggest change, no question, Democrats seize control of the House, breaking the Republican monopoly in Washington. They are now in the game. In the Senate, the Republicans not only held their majority, they added to it. Many of the winners in states that President Trump visited in the final days of the campaign, but they already controlled the Senate. The House is a huge shift after 2 years of virtually no oversight from Congress. Now it's here. Among other things, Democrats are already saying they want to see the president's tax returns. White House Counselor Kellyanne Conway tells CNN, quote, they're talking about investigations and subpoenas, and he's talking about issues. Kellyanne's going to talk to Allison in the 8 o'clock hour of the show.
Okay, so exit polls point to several interesting factors. The biggest, women. Especially in the suburbs, women made up 52% of the overall electorate. They went for Democrats over Republicans by about 20 points. It was a rough night for some high-profile Democrats. Andrew Gillum in Florida, Beto O'Rourke in Texas both lost their bids. And Stacey Abrams in Georgia is behind at the moment, but refusing to concede. Some key races in the Senate still too close to call. Razor-thin margins in Florida, Montana, and Arizona. In Mississippi, a special election is headed to a runoff. So we have it all covered for you. These numbers change by the minute. So let's begin with CNN's Phil Mattingly. He has the latest results for us. Where is it now, Phil?
Hey, Allison, I want to really focus in on the 3 races that are still outstanding in the United States Senate. You look at right now, the margin, if things hold, 55 Republicans, 45 Democrats, but things are not final. Let's start with Montana. Incumbent Democrat Jon Tester right now trailing by about 4,000 votes to Republican Matt Rosendale, 84% reporting. Key question, what's still outstanding? Does Jon Tester have a pathway? Well, there's 4 blue counties that are still outstanding with vote. There's not a ton of vote in those counties. Jon Tester, I'm told, still does have a pathway, but it's not a very large one right now. So Democrats right now sweating that race a little bit. Move down south to Arizona. This was another potential pickup opportunity. Jeff Flake, the retiring Republican senator. Right now, Martha McSally, the member of the House, is up by about 12,000 votes with 74% reporting. Let's see what's outstanding. See if Kyrsten Sinema, the Democrat, has an opportunity to come back here. Well, there's one outstanding county. Martha McSally is leading that county by 17 points. Again, nothing has been called yet, so there's still opportunities here, but the opportunities look, at least at this point, to be somewhat limited. And we want to move over to another race because people have been talking about this race all night. Governor Rick Scott running for Senate as a Republican against incumbent Bill Nelson. 99% reporting. Rick Scott is up by 38,000 votes. A lot of people have said, why don't you call this race? A lot of people think you should. Here's why. Right now, 0.4% separates these two challengers. 0.5% is the automatic trigger for Florida recount in a statewide race. There's also absentee ballots, which had to be postmarked by today and will likely be counted over the course of the next couple of days. Our decision desk is holding off calling this race until we figure out if there's going to be a recount and if those absentee ballots come in and what they actually say. So that's what's currently outstanding right now. Let's look at a broader sense of the map. And you guys talked about the 2 very divergent maps between the House and the Senate. If you're Mitch McConnell, you feel very good. Why do you feel good? You've got Indiana circled. You've got North Dakota circled. In Texas, Beto O'Rourke put up a mighty challenge, no question about it, losing by about 2 or 3 points, but he went down as well. Missouri, also a flip. Democrats right now, we knew they had a tough map going into this. They had to defend a lot of Trump-won seats. Democrats lost a lot of those seats. The open question is how big Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell's majority will be, not if he will have a majority. We know that's the answer. Let's move quickly, guys, over to the House because there's still some outstanding races there as well. I want to take a look at some of those. Again, you talk about the top line number that matters. As it currently stands, Democrats are leading or have had races called in 228 seats. Magic number was 218. They're over that threshold. The question is, how big is their majority going to be? Here's the uncalled pickup opportunities that are still out there. 7 for Democrats. And the key ones you want to look up now in California. Just a few minutes ago, when I was on the other set, this race was heading in Republicans' hands. Take a look at it right now. 50-50, 55% reporting, only 82 votes ahead. Guys, these races are going to stay tight. And why they matter when you look at the top line here, yes, Democrats have absolutely won the House. But when you look at races that are a couple hundred votes apart, and there's a couple of them here, you can even go in to Georgia 6. Everybody talked about this in the special election. Right now, it looks like the Democrat may win this as well. Margins matter when you have a House majority. Yes, likely to be Speaker Nancy Pelosi. How many votes will she have to work with? That's what we're going to be figuring out over the next couple of hours, guys.
All right, Phil Mattingly for us at the Magic Wall. Phil, great to have you here. You've been up all night, still counting votes one by one if you have to, and in some cases.
I mean, really, some of them are that close, as he was just saying. 82. Every vote counts, as we've learned.
And Phil's on each and every one of them. All right. let's talk about all this. Joining us, David Gregory, Jeff Zeleny, Alice Stewart, Nina Turner. David Gregory, I want to start with you because in terms of what has changed on planet Earth, and specifically in Washington this morning, Democrats are taking control of the House. That is a giant deal. That is a different world for the president to live in.
No question. 2016, the reverberations felt. Democrats felt decimated. They won the popular vote in the presidency, lost the Electoral College, lost the presidency, lost all control of Washington. So the Democratic Party struck back and struck back big. I mean, they not only won the House, we're counting to see what that vote total is, but they showed strength across the board, right? They exploited where the president's unpopular with suburban voters, college-educated voters, where he's weak, rather, among women. They picked up a seat in central Oklahoma. They picked up a seat in South Carolina. They picked up a seat, Culberson, outside of Dallas, showing all of the strength that we've seen in demographic changes, mobilization, energy. Those races, the governor's races, appear to be disappointing, certainly in Florida, perhaps as well in Georgia, showing that even with demographic changes, even with energy, it's still difficult in the South, in those two states. But Beto O'Rourke in Texas, a lot of strength there. But we also saw two things: polarization and the resiliency of Trump as a campaigner, as a political force, somebody who can consolidate that support, particularly in rural parts of the country. So there's a lot there. Not the blue wave a lot of people thought was coming, but certainly a big night.
So blue wave in the House, red wave in the Senate, if you want to call that. The president can feel good. Basically, there are a lot of different factions that can be celebrating tonight and see it as a victory for themselves. So explain that paradox.
Well, I think the fact that, this was always two separate elections. I mean, the Republicans had the blessing of geography going into this because all of these Senate races were in red states. But look where the president went. He largely won all of those Senate seats. The question we don't know is, did his rhetoric at the end of the day, did his harsh tone on immigration hurt the House? We'll be looking at that for a long time to come. One thing I noticed overnight, so interesting, as the president goes forward, what does he do? Sarah Sanders, the White House press secretary, she told reporters shortly before midnight the president had no plans to call Speaker Pelosi.
Not yet Speaker Pelosi.
And then, well, former Speaker Pelosi. Speakers always call themselves speakers even after they leave. The president called Nancy Pelosi just a couple hours later. The reality is President Trump knows he's waking up to a new era in Washington. How much will he work with them? I think more than we might think at this point. So that is certainly something to keep an eye on. But the president, for all the thought of how he was going to hurt all these Senate Republicans, that did not happen. He was helpful at the end of the day by him making this race all about him, which it was. It helped save Senate Republicans, no question.
In those states, for sure. And this White House political team deserves credit for picking the right spots to go.
As does the president.
To campaign for those senators in those places. The House, a different story. Nina, I want to go to you because I think it's easy to tell what the Republicans' mood is this morning to an extent. They lost the House. I think they knew they were going to do that.
Sure.
But perhaps they picked up a few more Senate seats than they thought. How did Democrats, deep down inside, really feel this morning?
I mean, mixed, John. I mean, for me, this has been heavy, especially because, and I was talking to David a little bit about that, especially because of Florida and Georgia. And there's something extra special about Florida and Georgia. It was the weight of history, too. These were not just ordinary races. It wasn't just Stacey Abrams and Andrew Gillum were trying to jump mountains. I call them mountain jumpers. Some people have smooth surfaces. They had to try to overcome mountains. So in that regard, for a lot of Democrats, that is very heavy because people poured their heart, soul into those two races. But in terms of them taking back the House of Representatives and being able to be a check and balance on this president, the Democrats were, in fact, successful. They won 6 more gubernatorial, races trying to make up for lost ground because, since 2010, Democrats have lost 1,100 seats, and that's including state legislatures and also governor's mansions. But it has to be mixed. I will say also in Florida, one positive thing did happen, and that is the Second Chance Amendment, where 1.5 million returning citizens, ex-offenders, will be able to regain their right to vote. That has a very powerful impact on the African-American community disproportionately because they are disproportionately, impacted by those kinds of laws. So it's mixed this morning.
Alice, same question. How are Republicans feeling this morning?
They're feeling justified, but given that we knew this was going to happen. This is exactly how it was expected to turn out. The blue wave in the House was something we expected for three reasons. One being history. Generally, the party in power loses seats. Another is Democratic fundraising was really strong, so that was beneficial to their candidates, as well as the retirements. We had a lot of Republicans retiring, so that opened up some seats for Democrats to make some headway, and that's certainly the way it happened. I will say, with regard to those two races you mentioned in Florida and Georgia, Gillum and Abrams ran phenomenal races. They were tremendous candidates, and the good thing is we haven't seen the last of them. They've got great futures ahead of them. These were strong, hard-fought races, but at the end of the day, all the emotion we had behind these candidates, Oprah Winfrey brought out a lot of that in Georgia. The emotion just wasn't enough to match the intensity on the issues that Republicans had. Republicans were very firm on the issues and sticking hard with their core Republican values. That drove more voters to the polls. And at the end of the day, that was beneficial in Georgia, Florida, and as well in Texas. I think the Ted Cruz victory was strong.
Well, but I have to add in Georgia in particular, I mean, what the Secretary of State managing, the election process and the voter suppression that has gone on there. So it wasn't just that it was a smooth path for Stacey Abrams there. A lot of politicking went on in Georgia, the racialization of those two races by both the president and the candidates, that also Andrew Gillum and Stacey Abrams, that had a lot to do with it too. Again,
It was not a level playing
they
field.
had the, that's it. They had to jump mountains. Absolutely.
I also want to see, I'm very curious to see what the voting totals are, particularly among younger voters, right? This is what's going to be important. And in a way, I mean, I agree with both of you. We're going to look in 2020 at, as we have started to already, we're going to look at Georgia, we're going to continue to look at Florida, we're going to look at Arizona. These Sun Belt states are going to be where the action is. What Beto O'Rourke did in Texas is shocking, because these states are changing and the demographics are changing. And so they may have fallen short in these governor's races, but we look at millennial voters, their turnout, but that energy is there and is growing.
Well, let me quote Ron Brownstein, who we'll see in a little bit. States like Arizona and to a lesser extent Texas, they're the future of the Democratic Party and always will be, which is to say that it always just seems out of reach. So call me when it happens is sort of my theory on those states. What we did see overnight and into this morning, we're still seeing it in California, is real movement in the suburbs. And it wasn't long ago where the suburbs, it was the base of the Republican Party, Alice. I mean, George W. Bush made his election based on these suburban areas, and now they're just melting away. You go state by state, and Jeff, to you, melting away here. It's safe to say, a reaction, I think, to the president. Does the White House think this is an even trade? Is this something that they're all concerned about? Is this an area you think the president might try to pivot in the next 2 years?
I think it's challenging for him to try to pivot, frankly, in some of those suburban districts. That's not how he won in the first place. I'm not sure how that is how he will try and win a re-election. But look at governor's races and other things. This is what concerns the White House, and it should concern the Republican Party as well. Democrats, a very strong night in state legislative races, our early numbers show as well as the governor's race in Wisconsin, a state that the president won, and Michigan, a state the president won. So this is a new landscape for Trump 2020. He is going to start campaigning almost immediately. He liked those rallies. One advisor told me, look, the rallies aren't ending. They are just starting. He liked the feel of this. But the reality here is the president has a choice to make. At the halftime mark of his first term in office, he has a choice to make if he wants to keep on the same path or if he wants to pivot a little bit. And will Democrats allow him to pivot? So much going on there, but he is in charge of so much of this as he brings in a new team, which he's definitely going to do.
All right, panel, thank you all very much for all of the insights. Stick around if you would. In Georgia, Stacey Abrams is down but not out in her bid to become the nation's first black female governor. She trails the Republican Brian Kemp by just over 2 percentage points, but she is not conceding at this hour. Our Nick Valencia is live in Atlanta with more. What's the situation at this hour, Nick?
Allison, this goes without saying, but it was a very bitterly contested governor's race, and at least right now, officially, it is still not over. Even though 99% of the precincts are reporting and Democrat Stacey Abrams trails Republican Brian Kemp by more than 80,000 votes, she has hope that there are tens of thousands of absentee ballots that could bring 50% of the threshold, that 50% mark that Brian Kemp has, below the threshold, enough to send this into a runoff. This is something that she addressed to a rally of supporters last night during the campaign headquarters at her event there. She said that she knows it's going to be an uphill battle, but it's still a very real possibility.
Votes remain to be counted. There are voices that were waiting to be heard.
across our state, folks are opening up the dreams of voters in absentee ballots, and we believe our chance for a stronger Georgia is just within reach. But we cannot seize it until all voices are heard.
Abrams didn't mention Kemp by name, but did say that there were people hard at work to, quote, try to take our voice away, alluding to allegations that she made against Brian Kemp of suppressing voters. Brian Kemp is the Secretary of State, a position that oversees the elections here in Georgia, some calling it a conflict of interest. Now, for his part, Kemp didn't declare victory last night at his campaign headquarters, but did say that he is confident that the math is in his favor to win this election. Guys?
But Nick, I mean, how long will it take to count these absentee ballots?
Well, the December 4th runoff, that's the mark, but that is the outstanding question, is just how long it will take. 99%, Allison, of these precincts already reporting. The local paper here, the AJC, say 100% of the precincts are reporting. It is really a sort of a Hail Mary here, those tens of thousands of absentee votes. She's counting on Metro Atlanta, which is, as I mentioned, predominantly progressive, to try to get her over the mark, Allison.
Nick Valencia in the middle of it all in Atlanta. Nick, thanks very much. Still counting votes in Montana. Can Jon Tester hold on? Still counting votes in California congressional races. Will the Democrats expand their margins in the House? We are watching all of it, and we're going to talk about what the Democrats might do with this newfound power in Trump's Washington. Stay with us.
To flip at least 6 seats from the GOP, but Republicans managed to hold key seats in the Midwest. The most contested race is still playing out in Georgia. That's where Stacey Abrams refuses to concede at this hour. She's hoping that absentee ballots will help close the gap and then force a runoff with Brian Kemp. CNN's Phil Mattingly has been crunching all these numbers. He's here with the latest results. What's it looking like now?
We've been talking about the divergent maps between the House and the Senate, and Democrats really looked at governor's races as the place where they could put their stamp on this night. And these, you noted, mixed results. But I want to focus on the things Democrats are most hurt about this morning when you talk about the races they watched. And first, start with Florida. Andrew Gillum was considered a top-tier candidate. The Democratic Party was behind him, thought of him as the future for the party. He ended up losing. Ron DeSantis, 49.7% to 49%. He conceded. That's obviously, as we talked about, beyond the 0.5% recall trigger. That race is now over. You talked about Stacey Abrams, another really big, lot of momentum behind them in the Democratic Party. Right now, that race is still uncalled because, as Nick laid out earlier, she has not conceded that race. So those are two difficult losses for Democrats. Here's another one. Ohio. If you talk about Ohio, people going into this night thought Richard Cordray, the former director of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, had a real opportunity here. Mike DeWine, state attorney general, ended up winning this race by about 4 points. Here's why that's problematic. And you talk about what this means for the future. You're losing places like Florida, like Ohio, in governor's races statewide. That has 2020 implications, but more importantly, that has redistricting implications. When the new census comes out and they draft new congressional maps, those governors have veto power over this. This is why Democrats feel like they have a good night. Let's look at the actual seats that have flipped. And you're looking right now at 7 total if held. And where are those seats, guys? Because I think this is crucial. You're talking about Michigan. You're talking about Wisconsin. Scott Walker, Wisconsin, ended up losing, a longtime Democratic target. You're talking about Nevada as well. Why are those all important? You're talking about a little bit of a Midwest rejection of President Trump. Those are states that he won, and another crucial 2020 state. So mixed results. Democrats happy certainly in the Midwest, but not happy about what happened in Florida, Georgia, and Ohio, guys.
All right, Phil, thank you very much. Back with us, we have David Gregory, Jeff Zeleny, Nina Turner, and Alice Stewart. Okay, so in terms of those governor's races, let's just focus in on Florida for a second because that one was so high profile. So, David Gregory, with Andrew Gillum, is there anything to glean, any wisdom to glean from this? Progressives are not the flavor of the day, or are we looking too specifically?
Yeah, no, I think there's a lot that's positive there. I mean, I think Democrats are deeply disappointed because there was a lot of energy, there was a lot of enthusiasm. We can talk about the star power. That's a piece, but he was the real star power. A young, black, progressive, who I think what Democrats are looking for is who will lead us, not just the resistance, but who really will lead us and give us something to vote for. Give us someone to vote for, to create something of a movement. And I think Gillum represented that, and not just because he was young and fresh, because he had something to say that was meaningful, and he was doing it in a state that would be tough. It would be really tough to win. And to John's point earlier, these Sun Belt states are the Democratic future. But I think I think they will become their president at some point. These are such battleground states. but they just, weren't able to do it. So it shows you that demographics matter, but so does the polarization. And the president's strengths, the Republican strength in rural parts of that state and other states is still very meaningful, makes it very difficult.
It's interesting. I think if you would ask Democrats going into yesterday what the big governor's races they wanted would be, the top three would be Florida, Georgia, and Ohio, and they were 0 for 3 there. But, Jeff, they now control Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan. They already had Pennsylvania there. But those 3 states, you will remember, if Hillary Clinton had won, she'd be president today.
No question. So that is going to be something that is going to be a challenge for this president going forward. If he is going to be, to win a re-election, and we're going to move on to that much sooner than we probably should, but that's the reality here.
Oh, but that happened about 6 hours ago.
Exactly, in the president's mind as well.
Yeah.
And so that is something that is going to be an issue as we go forward here, particularly, as we said before, with redistricting. Going forward for the next decade, this is the critical year for governors, I think. But I think, back to Florida for 1 second, the president also plays a role here, and I think you have to absolutely give him credit for campaigning for DeSantis. But DeSantis was mini Trump during the primary.
Right.
He moderated during the general election, and he ended up winning at the end of the day here. But I think the White House, how they work with people of all sides, including these Democratic governors, is something I'm keeping an eye on. Again, it's the president's choice here. Is he going to remake himself a bit or keep going on? We don't know.
But you do look at those Democrats winning in Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, the upper Midwest. This is, where Democrats need to make changes.
But Nina, in the places where it has been a struggle for them, with Beto O'Rourke, with Andrew Gillum, with Stacey Abrams, who's still struggling right now, these were the big high-profile stars. So are there lessons to be learned here?
I mean, they softened the soil. I mean, Alice had brought that up in her first comments, and I do agree with her on that, even though I am not happy with the results. But they softened the soil. I mean, it wasn't a blowout. Andrew Gillum was the future of the Democratic Party, and he still is the future of the Democratic Party. He showed very clearly he ran as a true progressive, not a half-measure progressive.
But why don't you then take the lesson, then progressives aren't where he lost? So that's
but again, it's a difference between having a smooth surface, a rocky surface, hills, and mountains. Let us not forget the import of history in this country, that less than 5 African-American men have been elected as governor in this country, and no African-American woman has ever been elected. That history and that energy and momentum that both Abrams and Gillum had, that means something. Yes, they did not win, but they didn't get blown out either, even with the fact that they had to jump mountains, even with the racialized nature of it brought on by the president and the 2 candidates that they had to run against, making this about race in one of the most negative, despicable ways ever. All of that plays into this. So they have a lot to be proud of. And this is bigger than the Democratic Party. This is really about the future of America, that whether or not we are, as a country, fully ready to be represented in executive office by people who are black and brown. That's really what's on the line in this country.
Alice Stewart, if we can, I want to pull it back to the House a little bit now and talk about what we're going to see over the next few weeks and few months. Because the Democrats are coming into power here, and they have a choice to make, and the president has a choice to make. Should I hold my breath that they'll both decide miraculously to work together, or where do you think it's going?
You hold your breath and you'll be the boy in blue over there because you'll continue to hold your breath. A lot of it depends on who blinks first. Will the Democrats in the House be about legislation, or will they be about investigation?
You can be about both.
It could. Simultaneously, as Paul Ryan says, we can walk and chew gum at the same time. I hope they will have a kumbaya moment and actually get things done. We did see when the president met with Chuck and Nancy that they had the summit and they had some type of agreement with regard to DACA and immigration, but it didn't move forward. I think what we need to do is agree, okay, if we're going to get things done, we have to work together. We can't just have meetings and have talk and no action. We have to follow through and have bipartisanship. I'd like to think that's what we're
Do
going
they
to
want it, though? I mean, ultimately, do they want it? Because if you want to continue to resist the president, do you want to investigate? Do you want to use the subpoena power? You heard Nancy Pelosi being cautious about impeachment, which I think is a good idea. I don't know. The president's always going to spoil for a fight. He had an immigration deal. He had money from Democrats to build the wall.
Right.
And he said no because he wanted to take a more hardline position. If you're the Democrats, I'd want this immigration issue off the table. I think a lot of Republicans want it off the table, too. I'm not holding my breath on that. But I always think there's an opportunity because they both have reasons to want this issue off the table before 2020.
The question is, do Democrats want DACA more, or does the president want the wall more? So it's whether they come together and decide who wants what.
Who's going to run the Democratic Party in the House of Representatives, Jeff?
At this point, you have to give an edge to Nancy Pelosi, the former speaker and potentially current speaker or future speaker. There's no one who holds sway over as much of the House Democrats as she does. She raised money. She's largely responsible for this. She's also responsible for some of the Democrats losing out there. But until there's a center of gravity around someone else, either from the California delegation or the CBC, if she loses support from there, she's in trouble. But as of now, you have to say, I think that she is the most likely next speaker. She's been there before. She knows how this works.
She can count votes. I mean, she's really one of the few people left in Washington who can count votes.
Without a doubt.
It's not a rush to a new tomorrow in either the Senate or the House, but 100 women in the House in the next Congress, which has never happened before.
It depends if there's a center of gravity around anyone.
All right, panel, thank you very much.
So the candidates, they were not the only thing on the ballot. Initiatives on marijuana, redistricting, even voting rights for felons. A CNN reality check next. On that front, John Havlon here with a reality check on all the ballot issues.
That's the only one you care about, isn't it?
I feel like it's the only one you hear about. Every 2 years, marijuana is on the ballot again.
And the wisdom of the people overrides their state legislatures again and again.
I'm not taking a position. I'm just saying it's there.
Well, it's an interesting result we had this year. So, yeah, marijuana legalization, but also felon voting rights, redistricting reform. Those are just some of the ballot initiatives that passed last night in election 2018. And if you look at the whole spectrum of 158 statewide ballots, you get the sense that America's far more interesting and evolving than the old red state, blue state stereotype would suggest. So let's start here. The swing state of Michigan just legalized recreational marijuana, while conservative Utah and Missouri voted to allow medical marijuana. But while those states are singing Peter Tosh's Legalize It, Allie, that was for you. Voters in North Dakota echoed Merle Haggard and Okie from Muskogee. They don't smoke marijuana in Dakota. They just turned down a legalization measure by almost 20 points. Now, if you're concerned about the polarization of American politics, voters in Michigan, Colorado, and Missouri approved nonpartisan independent redistricting commissions, which will effectively end the rigged system of redistricting and lead to more competitive general elections for Congress and more representative results. Now, the fight for voting rights was a big theme this year, and voters in Florida decided to restore voting rights to felons who've served their time going forward. Nevada backed automatic voter registration. Maryland approved same-day voter registration. Now, on the flip side, in the South, Arkansas and North Carolina backed requirements to show voter ID at the polls. Now, we all know polls said health care was issue number one for voters this year, and citizens of Idaho, Nebraska, and Utah are now requiring their conservative states to accept Obamacare's Medicaid expansion. It's a big deal. Massachusetts voters refused to roll back transgender rights after passage of a 2016 bill that was backed by the state's now re-elected Republican governor, Charlie Baker. And Alabama backed a symbolic proposal to allow the 10 Commandments to be posted in public spaces, which will almost certainly face legal challenges, while also asserting the rights of anti-abortion principles and, quote, the rights of unborn children in the state constitution. Now, and crimes victims' rights proposal known as Marsy's Law, controversial because it adds costs and complexity to legal proceedings, passed in 6 states throughout the South and West. So that's your reality check.
All right. I mean, I really like Sublime's song, I Smoke 2 Joints in the Morning.
Really? You went Sublime on that one?
Yeah.
The song.
The song, please.
Just, it's, you know.
Just song. All right. Thank you very much. What were the biggest surprises last night? And how about those polls? Did they reflect reality? All of that coming up. Senior writer and analyst Harry Enten. Before we get to what surprises there were and what's in store for 2020, we have to talk about the polls. Harry, every morning we listened to your forecast. Was your forecast accurate? Has it played out accurately?
It seems to me that it did. Our final forecast had Democrats winning either 227 seats on a median or 229 seats on the average. And right now, I believe that they'll probably pick up about 229 seats in the House of Representatives. And let me tell you, I'm not a soothsayer. I don't go to Miss Cleo. I base my forecast on the polls. And so the polls were pretty good if my forecast was pretty good.
You stuck it. You stuck the landing on the polls completely. There are going to be people who say, oh, my God, the polls are wrong. The polls are wrong. Harry, you told us what was going to happen. It happened.
Maybe you are Miss Cleo.
Maybe I am.
Ron Brownstein, I want to go to you, though, because I want to know why this happened the way it. Explain to me this divergence where Democrats can sweep into the House with, if not something like a blue wave,
Right.
and then Republicans can pick up those.
Absolutely. And, people kind of look at it and say, how could these things both happen at the same time? And the answer is that we have two divergent Americas that rendered utterly antithetical verdicts on the first 2 years of the Trump presidency. And the key to it, the key to the divergent result last night is this gap that we've been talking about, the widening gap between the voting preferences of whites with a college education and whites without a college education. In the exit poll yesterday, the national exit poll, Democrats won 53% of college-educated white voters. And that was the key to their victory in suburban districts, literally from coast to coast. I mean, we're talking New Jersey, Philadelphia, Detroit, Chicago, Minneapolis,
Oklahoma.
Des Moines, Oklahoma, Charleston, Denver, Tucson, but not only those, places like Atlanta, where they apparently want a seat, and not to mention Houston and Dallas. The entire urban, kind of the diverse urban metros moved significantly against the Republicans last night. On the other hand, if you look at the exit poll, the national exit poll, Republicans won 61% again of whites without a college education. They also ran even higher than that among evangelical whites, and they ran very well among rural whites. And so when you look at the Senate map, particularly, those interior states of Missouri, North Dakota, Indiana, that's where those voters are. So you now have, I think, these two Americas that have utterly different verdicts on what Donald Trump means for the country, utterly different verdicts about where they want to see the country going, how they feel about the big demographic, cultural, and economic changes that we're living through. And they are now, I think, more separated and more starkly aligned than ever.
And to give you your due, this is what you predicted as well. You've been telling us every time you come on New Day to look for that in terms of the college education versus non-college white voters. So you got that right as well. So let's talk about what surprised you both. Since you got a lot right, what surprised you last night?
Well, I think the fact was that even though the polls were pretty good, where we saw the errors, they tended to overwhelmingly be in those states that had a lot of white voters without a college degree. So look at states like Missouri, look at states like Indiana, look at states like West Virginia and Montana. Although we got the forecast right in West Virginia and Montana, it ended up being a lot more Republican-leaning than we thought. And then in Missouri and Indiana, it flipped the races the other way.
Well, that's the thing. It's not a shock that the Democrats lost in Missouri and Indiana, but the margins seem to be much bigger.
Well, look, in this modern world, I mean, you're talking about in all of those states, the Republicans ran about 60% among whites without a college degree. That is what Trump has done. The trade Trump is imposing on the party, we see it very clearly. Strong with rural, white, blue-collar, and evangelical whites, but the cost in the suburbs became much more real yesterday than it has been before.
Is there a 2020 implication in that last statement you made?
No. So it's kind of interesting for 2020. First of all, the three states that made Trump president, the three that he dislodged from the blue wall that I coined in 2009 were Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. Democrats yesterday won the governor and a Senate race in each of them. And though they didn't blow off the doors among these working class whites, they got back into the 40s, which is really all they have to do to win them. And on the other hand, I would kind of offer a slightly dissenting view. The Sun Belt path, while not fully realized, and you see the obstacles, was also open. I mean, Democrats got to 48 or 49% at least in Georgia, Texas, and Arizona. They probably, Harry, when was the last time? Last Democrat who got to 48% in any of those states, I'm betting was Janet Napolitano in 2006. And just to underscore the point, Allison, Beto O'Rourke got more votes yesterday than Hillary Clinton did in the 2016 presidential race, which is a pretty remarkable statement in an off year. So, I mean, they're still uphill, but I don't think you can look at the results in those states and say Republicans can entirely put them in the bank. So clearly the first option is the Rust Belt, where Democrats have shown they kind of crawled off the mat. But I think there's a Sun Belt path that is at least open to discussion with the right nominee.
Always going to be out there. It is
the mirage.
It is the future and always will be,
mirage.
as Ron Brownstein says.
Harry Enten and Ron Brownstein, thank you both very much.
And you nailed it. Don't sell yourself short.
I try not to, but it's my Jewish way, my Jewish mother. I'm just always trying to please.
All right, excellent. Thank you guys very, very much. Most of the late night comics, they were live for the midterm elections. Their take on the big vote. That's next.
We've even got a Steffi graph, and I'm warning you.
Hosts stayed up late to do live shows last night. Here are your late night laughs.
The Democrats have taken control of half of one of the three branches of government. All the GOP has is the other half of Congress, the Supreme Court, and a president who does whatever he wants. So far, tonight's feeling is, yes. All yes.
And no matter what the outcome, whether you're Republican or Democrat, I think we can all agree that the big loser this year is all of our Thanksgiving dinners. Thanksgiving issues ruined.
The results just wouldn't come in. Right, the whole day, like for the last few hours, it's just been too close to call, too early to call. It's like we texted America, "You up?" And then all we could see is that little typing bubble.
Most of us use a highly advanced smartphone to learn about the candidates, to locate our polling places. We use an app to call an Uber, to navigate through traffic and drive us right to the door in the most efficient way possible. And then we fill out a Scantron in an old lady's garage. And they give you a sticker. People do love those stickers. Oh, everyone's very proud of their stickers today.
He's right. People do. People love the stickers.
Well, yes, and he makes a point about how antiquated it is. But the other point is that I don't know that we all trust technology at this point and online things. So that's where we're calling.
They were so freaking proud they stayed up and did live shows. I don't think I've slept since, 2003 at this point. I can't remember the last time I
delirious,
slept.
basically.
There's a little bit of that. Democrats take the House. That is a major change in the power structure of Washington. Republicans expanded their majority in the Senate, and you know what? There are still votes being counted as we speak. We will tell you what is happening at this moment next.
We want to welcome our viewers in the United States and around the world. This is New Day. It is Wednesday, November 7th, 6 o'clock here in Washington. The midterm elections have delivered a split Congress. That's the big headline. Democrats seizing back control of the House by a decisive margin. Votes are still being counted as we speak. Democrats are already vowing to have more robust investigations of President Trump. But Democrats hit a red wall in the Senate. Republicans not only maintained control, but they increased their majority there.
President Trump spoke with the once and possibly future House Speaker Nancy Pelosi to congratulate her after the Democratic win. Pelosi celebrated the retaking of the House by saying Americans have had enough of division, and then she hit Republicans.
Today is more than about Democrats and Republicans. It's about restoring the Constitution's checks and balances to the Trump administration. It's about stopping the GOP and Mitch McConnell's assaults on Medicare, Medicaid, the Affordable Care Act, and the health care of 130 million Americans living with pre-existing medical conditions.
The checks and balances thing is serious. This will be the first time that the president has had to deal with congressional oversight since he's been in office. Look at the exit polls here. Several key factors. The biggest, probably women, especially in the suburbs. Women made up 52% of the overall electorate. They went for the Democrats over Republicans by about 20 points. This morning, key Senate races in Florida, Arizona, and Montana still undecided. In Mississippi, it's going into overtime. There's a special election there that will be headed to a runoff. And in Georgia, Stacey Abrams is refusing to concede the governor's race there. She wants every last vote counted. We have it all covered for you. Let's go to CNN's Phil Mattingly, though, at the Magic Wall, because it's not over in some places. Phil, what are you watching?
Yeah, it's not over, and there's actually some really important votes still coming in. Look, let's start with the Senate. As it currently stands, as you noted, it's a little bit of something for everyone, depending on which side of the Capitol you sit on, whether this was a good or bad night. If you're a Republican and you sit in the Senate, this was a very good night for you. Right now, as things currently stand, Republicans lead in 55 seats. They would have a 5-seat total majority. Democrats in 45. However, one of those states that's currently red, Montana, still outstanding vote. And guys, I want to dig in here because it's really important. Matt Rosendale's lead has dropped since we last spoke to about 1,500 votes. And earlier I said Jon Tester, the Democratic incumbent, has a narrow pathway. I'd like to revise that. He has a clear pathway now, not a guaranteed pathway, but he has a pathway. 94% reporting. So the question is, what's still outstanding in the vote? Look at what's still outstanding. Jon Tester trailing by 1,500 votes. 5 Democratic counties basically are still outstanding. And Jon Tester, while there's not a ton of vote in all these counties, he very clearly has an opportunity to pick up 1,100 votes, 1,200 votes in these counties, potentially pushing over the top. We're going to have to keep a very close eye on this right now. The Democrats starting to feel a little bit better about this race. A little bit different down in Arizona, another state we still haven't called yet, still waiting to see what happens. As it currently stands, Martha McSally, this is for the open seat that Senator Jeff Flake, a Republican, decided to retire. Martha McSally, the Republican, currently 14,000 votes ahead over Kyrsten Sinema, a House Democrat who's running, 75% reporting. basically this is looking like it's about baked. It's still outstanding. There's still going to be absentees counted as well, guys. Obviously a very close race right now, but most of the counties have come in. Right now, Maricopa, one of the interesting elements here, Kyrsten Sinema actually won Maricopa County, or is right on the verge of it with 99% reporting, and is still trailing. That's a bad sign for Democrats, but we will have to wait and see on that one as well. Let's go to the other uncalled race at this moment. It's Florida, and you want to explain why this is uncalled. As it currently stands, Rick Scott up by about 34,000 votes, but the most important number here is 0.4%. That's how much the margin is right now. In Florida, the law is an automatic recount is triggered if it's less than 0.5%. That's where it stands right now. There's still absentee ballots coming in, or that had to be postmarked yesterday, that they'll be counting over the course of the next couple of days. That's why it's not called yet, as people wait and see. That's what our decision desk is waiting for. So keep an eye on Florida as well over the next couple of days. Now, again, I said, if you're Mitch McConnell, the Senate Majority Leader, you're looking at this map and you're very happy. You're looking at Democrats who had a lot of races in Trump country. Well, they lost a lot of those races. They lost in Indiana. They lost in Missouri. They lost in North Dakota. Beto O'Rourke, the challenger to Ted Cruz, had a ton of Democratic enthusiasm and a ton of Democratic money. He made it very close, but he also lost here down in Texas. So Democrats looking at a larger majority for Republicans in the Senate. You want to take a look real quick over at the House where things stand? Basically, guys, Democrats right now, the top line number, 229 seats, 218 is the majority. Still some races outstanding in California we're keeping a close eye on. The big question now is what kind of margin are Democrats going to have to work with? But if Republicans had a great night in the Senate, Democrats definitely had a great night in the House, guys.
All right, Phil Mattingly over at the Magic Wall. Phil, you're doing a great job over there. John King finally letting someone else touch the wall, and you're doing great. So
Only Oh,
thanks for being there with us.
he's asleep right now. Boy, is he going to be mad.
Yeah, John can't do anything about it. Thank you, Phil. Appreciate it. I want to give you one update on voter turnout. We just got word that so far, 113 million people have voted.
I mean, just incredible. So the predictions of people being engaged and of this being a landmark midterm have come to pass.
Yeah, it was 83 million in 2014, which was actually an historically low turnout. And in 2010, it was 96 million. This blows both those out of the water. I want to bring in our CNN political analysts and commentators, David Gregory, Jackie Kucinich, Bakari Sellers, and Scott Jennings. So Phil just told us what is happening. I think the two other questions are what happened and what will happen now that Democrats have taken over. David, biggest of big pictures. Talk to me about the most significant thing.
Out of the doldrums of 2016, Democrats have struck back. They've taken the House. They've shown surprising strength around the country. Bakari will talk about winning an important seat in South Carolina, Central Oklahoma, winning a seat outside of Dallas. This is not just about, as Bakari said the other day, it's not just about Democrats playing in the coast. They're playing all over the country. The president in an up economy, in a strong economy, still losing a lot of seats in the House. And even in Sunbelt states with impressive candidates that ended up being losing and disappointing losses down in Florida and Georgia in the governor's races, still such signs of strength in those states for progressive candidates. Beto O'Rourke in Texas, another sign of strength. But the president has reason to be energized as well. He creates a lot of this energy, positive and negative, that's coursing throughout the country. His involvement really kept the Senate fortified for Republicans. And he had some pickups in states that will be important for him as he thinks about re-election as well. So this was not a blue wave, but a significant night for Democrats, which I think also some reasons for the president to feel good.
So, Bakari, as a Democrat, how are you feeling? I mean, these high-profile losses of Andrew Gillum, Beto O'Rourke, Stacey Abrams is still fighting.
Yeah.
That hurts, obviously, for you.
Yeah, I mean, it hurts. I mean, those are personalities. Those are friends. I mean, there are a lot of Americans who got to know these individuals. But because of their races, Democrats got results. Because of their races, that energy, it went from coast to coast. And so just because they lost their individual race does not mean the Democrats fared poorly last night. Some of the things that we looked at that happened were congressional pickups in Iowa, in Texas, amendments passed in Florida. Felons' voting rights were restored through Amendment 4 in Florida. If that was signed into law, Andrew Gillum wins this race. So that actually changes the dynamic of Florida moving forward. And I say that the biggest referendum on Donald Trump is a young man named Joe Cunningham, that Nancy Pelosi and the Democratic Party leadership are going to have to reckon with, and this country are going to have to reckon with. I think he's the future of the party. He won a district that was previously held by, I call him Governor Mark Sanford, but Congressman Mark Sanford. And it was Donald Trump Jr.'s last campaign stop. And so he pulled out a district that was a Trump plus 10 15 points. And he won it at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. And so Democrats have a lot to be proud of. I think the leadership, though, needs to do some introspection because Nancy Pelosi, Jim Clyburn, and Steny Hoyer don't necessarily reflect what was victorious for Democrats last night.
I want to talk much more about that in a little bit. First, I want to give your friend to the left there, ironically, Scott Jennings,
First time he's
bite your tongue, John Berman, a chance to agree with you that this was just a big, clear victory for the Democrats.
So here's what I think. Structurally speaking, nothing that happened last night tells me anything other than Donald Trump's favored for re-election in 2020. He remains in good shape in Middle America. The coasts are still unhappy with him. On the Senate side, Kavanaugh clearly locked in the Senate. Clearly.
How do you know that? What's your evidence that it locked in the Senate? You mean the Senate was going to go Democratic before
look at the races. The only race where we still don't know is Montana, and he voted. Tester voted against Kavanaugh, and he's been in trouble all night. But everybody else, Indiana, Donnelly went against Kavanaugh, lost. McCaskill against, lost. Manchin, the only Democrat to vote for, wins.
But Heller supported him.
And so.
And Heller's going home.
Oh, man, he ruined it.
Yeah.
I was like, wait a minute. That
Kavanaugh. Would you like to say that Democrats had a good night in the Senate, Bakari?
Oh, no, not at all.
Okay. All right, good. So Kavanaugh locked in the Senate. In the same way McConnell going all in on the Supreme Court, I think, delivered the presidency in 2016. So that's what's good for the Republicans. Here's what's bad, the suburbs. Donald Trump's going to have to embrace the boring. You know, I live in the suburbs. You move out there because you want your life to be boring. You know, you go to work, you take your kids to school, you go to your job, you rinse and repeat, you watch your Weather Channel and Mickey Mouse Clubhouse. You want your life to be boring. You don't need drama. You want peace, prosperity, and stability.
Is this what I have to look forward to?
Yes. And so, if there's a lesson to be learned, it's that you're fine in Middle America, but if you want to recover the suburbs, focus on what you say is boring, the economy, peace and prosperity. That's where I think Trump's got to pivot as he heads to his own re-election.
You just made me feel so bad about myself living in the suburbs.
Right.
He's right.
Like, wait a minute, that's not my life.
But I think the other thing we saw last night is that Republicans really do have and Trump himself have a very tight hold on two previously blue states, Florida and Ohio. You really saw in terms of the governor's races there and the Senate. We don't know yet, clearly, with Nelson. They weren't able to move the needle. And you really heard Democrats, particularly in Florida, wringing their hands last night because they weren't able to make any inroads in this state where they really should.
I'm thinking, what else can we try? We've tried everything in Florida.
Right, totally, completely. And that's sort of what they were saying last night. And they haven't found candidates that really can beat back the Trump surge in those states. And he also, President Trump did something that President Obama really wasn't able to do in a midterm election. He was able to pull people over by his barnstorming, get his people out for Republican candidates.
But these were still about a fight. I mean, I do think Kavanaugh had a huge effect in areas where the president was popular, which helped him to hold on to the Senate. But I think it's very interesting that we had the result that we had. The fact that I think both Bakari and Scott are right about the points that they're making shows you that this electorate is really shaking itself out in reaction to Trump. And there's a lot of fluidity going into 20. You look at these battleground states where in Florida, Iowa, Ohio, swing states, the GOP retain their control of the governorships. In the upper Midwest, Wisconsin, a big pickup on the governors, Pennsylvania. These are signs of strength for Democrats as well. And then, and of course, the engagement and the energy tells you something about how big 2020 will be.
Bakari, what about the progressive versus, moderate philosophy? So the progressives, I mean, in terms of the high-profile ones of Stacey Abrams and Andrew Gillum and Beto O'Rourke, didn't do so well.
Well, I actually have a different juxtaposition about where they fit on the spectrum because I think that there are people who are further left than them, like Ben Jealous, for example, in Maryland, who came up short against Governor Hogan. I think that this is not necessarily a referendum on whether or not our party is too far left or too far right. I think that our party embraced some of the values of a changing country. We just thought the country was changing faster than it is. And so if you look at Stacey Abrams, she's still in the race. I mean, it's a very close race. If you look at Jackie Rosen in Nevada, right, we're winning that race. And so when you start to look at the future of the country, we've realized a few things. It's going to be more diverse, and it's going to be led by women. And the Democratic Party embraced both of those theories. And so that's...
So the message you take away is stick with the progressive messaging.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the campaign that Andrew Gillum won was as good a campaign as you can possibly have in this climate. And let me just say something. I have to give Donald Trump credit on this note. That caravan nonsense, it actually worked, okay? The caravan, they're coming to take over. I mean, I know you hate the messaging. It actually worked because I think that there were people who otherwise wouldn't come out who came out in that election because they were stoked by fear and they appreciated the divisiveness.
Senate races worked. House races, Scott?
Well, again, I don't think the caravan, we already had the Senate locked in. Kavanaugh locked it in. And strategically, the president made a choice to go away from the economy and to talk about immigration. That did not work in the suburbs. They want to hear about the economy. So I think a tactical lesson learned here is that Republicans, conservative voters in these big rural states, they really do care about the Supreme Court. I think the immigration messaging was overkill. And that's why going back into the next round in 2020, he's got to focus on the economy. I do want to say, I agree with Bakari. I think they should stay with the progressive messaging. I think they should stay with Nancy Pelosi. I'd like to run more tape of Nancy.
We're not there. We're not there yet. We're going to talk about that.
That is the key.
So actually, let's take a break here because I think that's a great stopping point. After the break, I want to talk extensively about how the Democrats are going to handle this. They're the dog that caught the car now. What do they do with this newfound power? What does Nancy Pelosi do? What does Steny Hoyer do? Who's going to lead the Democratic Party? That and much more when this special coverage.
Behind at the moment, but not conceding in Georgia's heated governor's race. At this hour, she trails Republican Brian Kemp. You can see there by 68,000 votes, and she is spoiling for a recount. Nick Valencia is live in Atlanta with more. What's the situation, Nick?
Good morning, Allison. It was a bitter race. It was expected to be a very close race, and it is still not over. 99% of the precincts reporting, and Democrat Stacey Abrams still trails her Republican counterpart, Brian Kemp, by more than 75,000 votes. It is a significant number, but Stacey Abrams is hopeful, and her hope rests in tens of thousands of absentee ballots, particularly here in the metro Atlanta area, which is part of her progressive base. She addressed her supporters last night, saying it's going to be an uphill battle, but is not without or not outside the realm of possibility. Both Abrams and Kemp sounding confident speaking to their supporters.
Votes remain to be counted. There are voices that were waiting to be heard. Across our state, folks are opening up the dreams of voters in absentee ballots, and we believe our chance for a stronger Georgia is just within reach. But we cannot seize it until all voices are heard.
We are waiting on the final results, but I'm confident that victory is near.
Abrams didn't mention Kemp by name, but did allude to people hard at work trying to keep our voice away, alluding to allegations of voter suppression. Leading up to this election, there was an estimated 47,000 pending voter registrations, disproportionately affecting the minority community. It's because of that she labeled Kemp, who's a Secretary of State that oversees the elections here in Georgia, as a vote suppressor. Many people seeing Kemp's role as a Secretary of State and him running in this race as a conflict of interest. For Abrams, she's counting on these absentee ballots and says that she is not going to concede until all of them are counted. John?
All right, Nick Valencia in Atlanta. We're watching that very closely. The Georgia governor's race, not the only big race in the country. You know, Scott Walker, after what seems like 100 re-election battles that he won, lost one. Phil Mattingly at the Magic Wall with the very latest on the governor's results.
Yeah, it was a little bit of a mixed bag, but certainly when you're flipping 6 governor's mansions, that's a big deal, and Democrats are very happy about that. However, there's a caveat to that. We talked about Georgia. Let's also talk about Florida. I was just speaking with one senior Democrat who texted me, this one hurt, and this one is Andrew Gillum, the Democratic challenger's inability to defeat Ron DeSantis, the Republican, the House member. He ended up winning Florida. Andrew Gillum had a ton of attention going into this race, a ton of momentum. People thought going into this race was considered kind of the future of the Democratic Party. That may still hold, but it won't hold in the Florida governor's mansion. So that's Florida. The other key issue that I think Democrats are a little bit disappointed in tonight, clearly Ohio. Ohio, Mike DeWine ending up defeating Richard Cordray by about 4 percentage points, 194,000 votes. Interesting element is Democrats in the Senate, Senator Sherrod Brown, won this state easily. They couldn't parlay that over to the governors. Now, good news if you're a Democrat, and that was going into this night where the opportunities actually were. If you take a look at Michigan, you take a look at Wisconsin, as you just noted, John, and a hold in Pennsylvania. These are all states that President Trump won in 2016. Had President Trump not won those states, President Trump would not be President Trump. So Democrats' ability to win statewide there is obviously a big deal. one of the bigger deals, I think, and John, you mentioned it, it's Wisconsin. The fact that Democrats were finally able to defeat Scott Walker. He's run and won twice. He had a recall. Tony Evers able to pull it out. We called this race 32,000 votes ahead. Democrats are certainly happy about that, but I think there's no overlooking the fact that with Florida, and depending on how Georgia turns out, some missed opportunities for Democrats. But certainly going into 2020, not just the presidential, but also the opportunity to redraft congressional lines and redistricting, which the governors will have veto power over. Good news when you're flipping 6, maybe even 7 seats, guys.
Okay, Phil, thank you very much. Come back to us as there's any movement there. So let's talk about the new reality that Americans are waking up to, a divided Congress. Dems win the House. The GOP keeps the Senate. Back with us to talk about this and more, we have David Gregory, Jackie Kucinich, Bakari Sellers, and Scott Jennings. So Scott Jennings, a wise man on the set said yesterday, Americans like divided government. I think it was John Berman.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
That's like the first nice thing. It's
You're
been 6
welcome.
months.
Yeah,
That's all right.
I work up slowly to it. So they have that, at least in Congress now. And from exit polls, some of the voters said that they did want checks and balances on the president. So now what does this look like? What does this mean?
Well, it reminds me a lot of what happened in 2006. I worked for President Bush, and after the Congress flipped, the Democrats inflicted a massive amount of investigatory pain and paralysis on the Bush administration in the second term. I think that's going to happen again. You're going to see investigations. They have to talk about impeachment. 80% of the Democratic Party wants it. There's a petition with 6 million signatures on it. They want it. A lot of these folks that are coming into the House want it. So they're going to go down that road. It's going to look in some cases like overreach, which I think will hurt them in 2020. So on the House side, I think it's investigations. For the global back and forth between the executive and legislative branch, it probably means gridlock, except in the Senate where they can still do judges. So I wouldn't expect major movement on legislation. I would expect a lot of investigations. McConnell's going to continue to go all in with Trump on judges, and we're going to have a presidential campaign over the top of all of it.
All right, Bakari Sellers, you are a Democrat.
Yeah.
Who do you want to see?
Still, I think.
Who do you want to see running the Democratic caucus in the House?
Wow, thank you for the loaded bomb question.
Well, no, but
no, I think.
so you're a younger Democrat.
This is my issue. My issue is that, for example, Lucy McBath is on her way to being a United States congressman because of Stacey Abrams, right? You have Shalala and a few others in Florida because of Andrew Gillum.
They rode coattails.
They rode coattails. You have Colin Allred and a few others in Texas because of Beto O'Rourke. You have these personalities. You have these progressive ideals and coattails who helped create this majority, right? That energy in the country was fed, even though we couldn't all vote for Beto O'Rourke. He created a lot of energy in our party. The problem that individuals are going to have with House leadership is that they don't reflect that portion of the Democratic Party. And so you have many people like Joe Cunningham, for example, who vowed to vote against Nancy Pelosi. I think there are about 10 members who won who vowed to vote against Nancy Pelosi, and 5 more of them is a race that's too close to call. And so with the 18-seat majority, the most difficult race, and Andy Kim in New Jersey, the most difficult race or vote that these individuals are going to have is not going to be health care. It's not going to be infrastructure or pharmaceutical drugs. It's going to be that House leadership vote this month.
But here's their biggest problem. There's no answer to the question, if not Pelosi, who?
Then who?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, she fundraises better than anyone else. Her member services operation, which I'm getting wonky here, but it had to do with how she treats different members. That's excellent. There's no better whip in the Democratic caucus than Nancy Pelosi. So there's no one to fill the void. It's hers to lose right now, simply because it's such a diverse caucus. What are you going to have? Like a middle-aged white guy?
But to Bakari's point, but Nancy Pelosi also gave us, to your point, and what Democrats fall back on. Not only is she our best fundraiser, but she also she carried the Affordable Care Act. She gave you Lilly Ledbetter. She led the stimulus and TARP.
But she's easy to vilify. And if you're President Trump, running against Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, there's already voters out there, Republican voters, who get it. You just hit play on that attack. And
are those changeable votes anyway? I mean, they're not going to be there's a new Democrat. I'm going to vote for them.
To Bakari's point, whether it's young people, whether it's minorities, the ascendant coalition of Democratic voters want to be led in a different way, or even suburban voters who are tired of some of this leadership. So it's a question because it has to be balanced. But there's always this opportunity with Trump where he sees some value in cutting some big deal with Chuck and Nancy, and then he reverts back to, no, let's just go back and fight.
The president needs a villain. He picked the caravan in this election, which didn't help in the suburbs. I'm cheering for Nancy because he needs a villain. The exit polls bear it out. She's the right one. Pick Nancy, and that will help bring you back.
I'm just curious, is there a way to split the baby where you say, okay, Nancy Pelosi, now she ushers us through the Democrats say, through the next 6 months or whatever, and then she cultivates
No, I
somebody.
think that's the answer, because one of the things that they failed to do, my party's failed to do, is cultivate a bench, right? So, I mean, it's not like Andrew Gillum and Stacey Abrams relied on some older structure of Democrats to say, come here. No, they just kicked the door down. And so we do have a lot of talent in our party. I mean, Grace Ming, Nanette Berrigan, Akeem Jeffries. I mean, we have some really, Tim Ryan, you have some really talented people. The problem is they've been frozen out. And so this is going to have to thaw, or you're going to have some serious
Who's
issues.
going to talk to Steny Hoyer and Jim Clyburn then? If you're going to reach some kind of succession deal and say, yeah, no, Nancy Pelosi's going to be here for a year and then someone else is going to move in, I don't see Clyburn or Hoyer just saying, okay, no problem with that.
That's right. And that's going to be, I mean, what's going to happen inside that Democratic caucus, and particularly in these first couple weeks, is going to be fascinating. We're going to see what direction they're going to take and where the lines start to be drawn, because it's one of the kind of double-edged sword. When you take the majority, your caucus becomes more ideologically diverse. And we saw Pelosi try to manage that when the last time they were in control, and they're going to have to do it now with a more progressive caucus in a lot of ways on that left side.
Let's just remember how much energy there's going to be around impeachment with whatever Mueller produces. There's going to be an effort to try to tamp down that enthusiasm, and there is the risk of overreach. Yes. And just as you said, Bakari, that a lot of progressives thought the country was changing not quite as quickly, I think there's a lot of voters out there who feel that they're being talked down to.
I agree with you.
And I think that is a problem for progressives, and I think it will continue to be, and there's nobody who knows how to exploit that better than President Trump.
I think you brought up a good point, and I think that we have to do a better job. We always talk about Donald Trump's tone, but Democrats have to do a better job tonally and with their rhetoric, and not being some highfalutin person who talks down to voters. The only pushback I give to you on that is that we did pick up 7 governor's seats last night, and we picked them up along that blue wall, as it's called, in Michigan, Wisconsin. And so, when you look at those things, the Democratic Party did not have an awful night. But to Scott's point, one of the things that the Democrats have to do is tone back the impeachment talk. I don't want to have impeachment hearings, but what I do want them to talk about are prescription drug prices and infrastructure, and work with Trump to make it happen.
You guys want to hear from President Trump? Because he's up.
Oh, boy.
He's up.
Is he watching us?
President is up. Good morning, Mr. President. This is what he writes moments ago. Received so many congratulations from so many on our capital B, capital V big victory last night, including from foreign nations, friends, that were waiting me out and hoping on trade deals. Now we can all get back to work and get things done. This was predictable. I think, again, if he woke up and had breakfast, he was going to declare victory here. He can rightly declare that they expanded their majority.
But interesting message, that what he's saying there is there are foreign leaders who thought he was in big trouble and who now think he's strong enough to do some deals with.
That's what he's saying.
As President Trump would say,
I don't know if that's true. I mean, I don't know if that's true, but that's what he's saying. And I know that foreign leaders certainly know how Congress works and knows that the House of Representatives is now in Democratic hands. So any legislation that might have been passed seems less likely now.
It's also just interesting because everybody is claiming victory this morning. So Democrats can claim victory, and the president can claim victory, and Republicans can claim victory. That doesn't often happen. So there we are.
It's a national moment of unity.
It is.
Not really.
Everybody's a winner. You get a victory. You get a victory.
Everybody's voting and everybody's happy. It is morning in America.
Yeah.
It's great.
Wow. Thank you all very much for the great conversation. So Democratic Congressman Conor Lamb wins the only race with 2 incumbents. How did he do it? We ask him next.
Democratic Congressman Conor Lamb handily beating 3-term Congressman Keith Rothfuss in Pennsylvania's newly drawn 17th congressional district. That is a pickup for the Democrats. Congressman Lamb, who was himself only elected in March in a special election, joins us now. Congressman, thank you for being with us, and congratulations to you, sir.
Good morning. Thank you for having me on.
How do you explain what happened last night? The Democrats took the House convincingly, and Republicans expanded their control of the Senate. Why?
You know, I know that in a lot of these House races, we brought new candidates into the fold, a lot of younger people, a lot of veterans, and what I picked up being out there was that people are ready for a change, and so, you know, maybe it's that in the House we were able to bring a lot of new people into the process.
Ready for a change. Well, that leads me logically to another big question, which is what now for the Democratic Party. You have control of Congress, and there will be a battle for leadership. You have said you will not vote for Nancy Pelosi. Do you intend to stick by that?
Yes, I do.
Then what's the way through this? What do you want to see? Would you support some kind of a transition figure, some kind of power sharing agreement? Do you have an idea of who you might support?
I don't have an idea of a specific person. I guess what I have are issues that need to be worked on. And I've heard about those from my constituents, infrastructure, getting more serious about the heroin epidemic, Social Security and Medicare, prescription drugs. These are the important issues where I come from, and so what I'll be looking for is someone who can tell us where those stand as a priority and put them at the top of the agenda.
So President Trump last night did call Nancy Pelosi to congratulate her. They both did talk about the idea of working together. Do you genuinely hold out optimism that there will be areas where the Democrats in the House and the president can work together? And what would the first thing you want to see done be?
I really do have optimism about that. I think the president has proven that he's interested in negotiating on a number of issues. He has talked a lot about prescription drugs recently and infrastructure. He's clearly interested. And, you know, there's no Democratic or Republican way to build a bridge or a road. And we've got to get the prescription drug prices down. It doesn't matter so much who does it or how we do it. We've got to get it down. And so I think both sides seem to be interested in that. There is no reason at all that we shouldn't be able to come to some kind of agreement.
One of the big changes will be now there will be a check and balance on the executive branch. Now there will be congressional oversight to an extent over the executive branch. Nancy Pelosi has said if she is Speaker, and maybe she won't be, that she doesn't want to see a push toward impeachment. 77% of Democratic voters, though, do. So to you, what's the right level of oversight here on the Trump administration, and particularly the president?
I think the right level of oversight is the amount that it takes to serve the people who sent us there. So in my case, for example, I'm on the Veterans Committee. Our goal is making sure that veterans get good health care. And so if someone's not doing their job, say with respect to, you know, medical records or long wait times for an appointment, it doesn't matter whether the Democrats or Republicans are in control. We need to have a hearing and find out who's responsible for that and get somebody new in there. And I think if we just keep that in mind, the good of the people that we're supposed to serve and not a partisan agenda, we'll do our job just fine.
Do you want to see the president's tax returns?
No, I want to build infrastructure and get prescription drug prices down.
And you don't want to see any kind of impeachment hearings?
Well, I haven't seen any evidence yet that would raise that. So it seems like you're skipping a few steps there. But there's a process in place. There's a special counsel who's looking at the whole problem. We need to give him the time and space to do his job. And then, you know, at any time that he finishes and presents us with his conclusions, we'll make a decision at that point.
Does it feel different being in the majority all of a sudden?
Not yet. It hasn't really been very long, but I feel very proud of the team that I've worked with and, you know, just honored to have the trust of the people here in Pennsylvania for a full 2 years.
You won 2 elections in a very short period of time. Conor Lamb, Democratic congressman from Pennsylvania, just reelected. Thank you so much for being with us, sir.
Thanks for having me on.
Okay, so what were some of the biggest surprises of the night? We look at those next.
Of the House of Representatives, at least 222 seats. Our forecast has it going up as high as 229 or 230. They are still counting votes in some places. As for the Senate, look at this. Still counting in Montana. Jon Tester about 1,400 votes, 1,500 votes behind. The people who know that state say there are enough votes perhaps out there for Tester to pull ahead. We're watching that very, very closely. Whatever happens there, Republicans have already had a huge night in the Senate. They widened their majority there. So a divergent, really, message being sent by the voters around the country. Let's bring in CNN senior political analyst Ron Brownstein to the forecast, Harry Enton, who did pretty much correctly forecast the entire House election. Ron, though, I want to start with you. I was talking about Jon Tester in Montana. You know, President Trump practically went door to door in Montana to campaign for the Republican in that race. Overall, what evidence do we have of the impact of the president?
Yeah, look, the long-term trend is that our congressional elections are becoming more quasi-parliamentary. I mean, they're less about individuals, more about how you feel about the parties, and particularly about the president. But even within that long-term trajectory of a heightened correlation between the way people feel about the president and how they vote for Congress, we reached a new peak in this election yesterday. According to our exit poll, 88% of the voters who approved of President Trump voted Republican for the House, and 90% of those who disapproved, which I believe is a modern high, voted Democratic for the House. If you look at the Senate, the Democrats who lost were among the few Democrats left in the 26 states that have voted Republican in at least four of the past seven presidential elections, a majority of the time. Democrats are down to about 5 senators from those 26 states, and Republicans are down to about 7 senators from the 24 states that have voted Democratic most of the time since 92. The whole system is separating and sorting out.
Harry, to give you props, as John Berman just was, we had your forecast every morning on New Day, and you seem to have really hit it out of the park. Your polling and your predictions seem to be right.
I won't be fired.
No, that was close.
You can never be sure.
What surprised you last night?
I think that there were a few things that surprised me. I think in Texas, I think Ted Cruz did a little worse than I thought. Beto O'Rourke, I was very skeptical of his bid, but he did better than any Democrat, and certainly since I've been following this stuff statewide in Texas. Granted, I am a young man, or at least that's...
You were before this election.
Before I was, but now after being awake for many hours. I think the other thing that kind of surprised me was the state of Florida, right? This is a state that a lot of us still think of as a swing state. I'm not sure it necessarily is anymore. Andrew Gillum led in the vast majority of the polls in the gubernatorial contest. He lost. Bill Nelson led in the vast majority of the polls in the Senate contest. He lost. And so I think there was a lot of talk about all these Puerto Ricans moving in, that this state may become more blue. That isn't what happened. In fact, it's the older voters who came out in large numbers, especially on the west coast of that state. And then the panhandle is becoming much more red.
It's fascinating. You know what else aren't swing states? Nevada and Virginia, which are now firmly blue.
Yeah.
But Ron, explain to us then, in Florida in particular, in Nevada and Virginia, it's the same thing, why you have that split.
Well, look, first of all, in Florida, I think for Democrats, when turnout gets that high, you just run out of people. Same thing, I think, in Texas at this point, although there may be a greater opportunity there with untapped Latino voters. Look, what we're seeing is the country sorting out. The results of the election on Tuesday night were a significant repudiation of the president in the large, diverse, info-age, white-collar metro areas pretty much everywhere. I mean, starting in Philadelphia and New Jersey, extending through Northern Virginia into Miami, and going all the way across the country. Chicago, Detroit, Des Moines, Kansas City, Houston, Dallas, even Atlanta. These are places where Democrats have not done well, all the way to Orange County. On the other hand, as you have this separation, those interior states that are preponderantly white, heavily blue-collar, mostly Christian, they are becoming tougher and tougher for Democrats to hold on to. And of course, where this leaves the country is with these two coalitions more sharply delineated than ever, and finding common ground between them a substantial challenge, to say the least.
Voter turnout was historic. 113 million people. That's the most of any midterm in any recent memory. Correct me if I'm wrong.
No, it most certainly is. And I think, both sides got their turnout to where they wanted to get to, and it benefited Democrats in the House, and it benefited Republicans in the Senate. And one thing I'll talk about in the Senate, if we are becoming divided along this urban-rural divide, that is very good news for Republicans going forward in the Senate, because each state gets 2 senators, regardless of population. And we saw that last night, where Democrats were able to sweep through in the House, but obviously struggled significantly in the Senate.
And that's how the framers wrote it. I mean, they designed it this way. They wanted a bit of a rural-urban split.
They did, but the one thing that was different when they did it was there was not a systematic political difference between the large and small states that we now see with the smaller states because of their demography leaning more toward Republicans than the big diverse
Ron
states.
Brownstein, Harriet, and thank you guys so much for being with us. I know people are waking up this morning saying, how did this happen? How do you have this split decision? The answer is, it's a perfectly good reason, as explained by both of you gentlemen. So thanks for that.
Okay, so how much of a referendum was this election on President Trump? We get a reality check next. Okay, things continue to change here by the minute. The election is not yet over. Votes in some critical places are still being counted, and we are bringing you minute-by-minute updates. So, how do, thus far, this year's midterms compare to past elections? CNN senior political analyst John Avlon is here with a reality check. Hi, John.
Hello. Yeah, so we've got all these numbers, and we got to focus on how they stack up. Impose some perspective on this process, people. So, split happens. But if you're feeling a little dazed and confused this morning, Here's how last night compared to the benchmarks. In the past, presidents with approval ratings below 50% have lost an average of 37 seats. Now, we can currently project that Republicans lost at least 26 seats, with 14 still out. That's enough to have Democrats take control of the House, but below the benchmark, at this point at least. Compare that to the 63 seats Barack Obama lost in 2010, and you see the impact of a strong economy and the simple fact that America is still a center-right nation. Now, that's a controversial comment to some liberals, but there's no denying that Gallup polls for decades have shown almost 3/4 of the electorate identifies either moderate or conservative. That's why independent voters are so key to cobbling together a majority. And exit polls show that independent voters swung 14% to Democrats in this year's election. That's exactly in line with CNN's projections, but that's below the 19% swing of independents to Republicans in the Tea Party year of 2010. The Democrats were defending 10 Senate seats in states that Donald Trump won, and Republicans picked off Indiana and Missouri, as well as North Dakota. Montana looks like it's trending Republican at John Tester's expense, but that is TBD. And Democratic attempts to flip Texas and Tennessee fell short. Arizona remains too close to call. So Democrats won governorships, though, in crucial Upper West swing states, knocking off Scott Walker's bid for a third term in Wisconsin and Gretchen Whitmer with a 10-point win in Michigan. Both states Trump won in 2016. But the region remains a battleground, with Republicans holding on to governorships in Ohio and Iowa. So Democrats also picked up several high-profile Republicans in suburban districts, from Dallas to Oklahoma City to Kansas City to beautiful Charleston, South Carolina. So this split decision election was a high-intensity, high-turnout election, and that's different. The last midterm elections in 2014 had the lowest turnout in 70 years, with 36.7% of voters casting 84 million votes for the House. This year, there were an estimated 113 million votes cast. So that's pretty extraordinary. That easily surpasses the historical average of 40% by almost 10 points. So whatever party you pull for, that's a good sign about the vibrancy of our democracy, and that's your reality check.
Excellent work. It's always great to have some reality at this hour in the morning.
Reality and coffee.
Yeah, I need the coffee, too. All right, John, thank you very much. This just in. White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders announced moments ago that the president will hold a news conference this morning at 11:30 a.m. Eastern Time. That's in the East Room. This is a very formal news conference. I predict the president will declare victory, even though the reality, as still more votes are being counted, is much more
How
complicated.
did you come up with that?
Just because. Because I'm breathing air. All right, we'll be right back. For viewers in the United States and all around the world, this is New Day after a long election night.
Hard to tell those two apart sometimes.
Also hard to tell what exactly happened last night, because there are mixed messages in the absolute extreme, giving both parties something to cheer. And we just learned that the president will talk about the election at a White House press conference. That's at 11:30 a.m. Eastern Time. Of course, CNN will cover that live. He has already declared what he calls a big victory. But the reality is far different from that, because he's going to have to deal with a major change in the power structure of Washington. Democrats have taken control of the House of Representatives, breaking the Republican monopoly here. They've already picked up 28 seats. There are still about a dozen races out still being counted, so their majority could grow even more over the next hours, and we are counting those votes over the next few hours. The big point for Democrats, they're very much now in the game.
And by the way, these numbers are still fluctuating. We're still getting some results. But in the Senate, the GOP not only held the majority, they added to it. Many of the winners were found in the states where President Trump visited in the final days of the campaign and held those rallies. Some key races in the Senate are still too close to call at this hour. Razor-thin margins in Florida, Arizona, and especially Montana, where incumbent Democrat John Tester has closed a deficit that was bigger when we first came on New Day this morning. So that number keeps changing. One thing is for certain, Americans did get out and vote in a historic number. There was an estimated 113 million people voting in these midterms. That's nearly 49% of all registered voters. And that doesn't sound like a big number, but it is. Votes are still being counted. So let's get right to the latest numbers. CNN's Phil Mattingly has been up all night. He has some updated results for us. Phil.
Yeah, Allison, I want to zero in right on those Senate races that are still outstanding right now, because the question is not, is Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell going to continue to be Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, but how big will his majority be? And one of that question is what's happening in Montana. John Tester is the incumbent Democrat, as you noted. When we started a couple of hours ago, it seems like a couple of days ago at this point, Matt Rosendale was up by about 4,000 or 5,000 votes. That's now sitting at about 1,600 votes. That's a lot in Montana, given the fact there's 94% in. But here's the key. Look what's still outstanding right now. You've got 5 counties that are still outstanding. All of them are Democratic counties, including 2 of the 3 largest counties in the state. Look at the margins in these counties. John Tester winning Missoula by about 31% at this point in time. John Tester winning Gallatin County by 21% at this time. So there are opportunities and pathways. You talk to Democrats, they feel like John Tester has a real opportunity here. We're going to have to keep a very close eye on that one, still continuing to fluctuate. The other one we've been keeping an eye on, Arizona. This has been pretty static over the course of the last couple of hours, with Martha McSally hanging on to her 14,500 vote lead over Kyrsten Sinema. Most of the vote that we've seen is in. And the interesting element is probably here, right here, Maricopa County, biggest county in the entire state. Kyrsten Sinema, the Democrat, is actually leading in this county and yet is still trailing statewide. Still waiting to see what else could come in there. But the fact that she's leading in Maricopa and trailing statewide, that's something that's got Democrats worried. Republicans feeling pretty good about where they stand in this race. Move over to the other outstanding race right now. It's Florida. The reason why it's outstanding, take a look at the margin. 0.4% separates Rick Scott and incumbent Democrat Bill Nelson. The reason why it's still outstanding, 0.5% is the trigger for statewide runoff in the state of Florida. There are still provisional ballots to be counted, still absentee ballots from military serving overseas to be counted. That's what the decision desk at CNN is waiting on right now. We'll see what happens when those come in. Could be a runoff. Have to wait and see. The other issue, obviously, the other thing everybody's paying attention to is what's going on in the House. And as you noted, Allison, there's still a couple dozen races, actually about a little more than a dozen races that are outstanding there. And I want to look at some of those real quick. These are the uncalled pickup opportunities right now. These are what we're focused on. There's about 13 races still outstanding. Take a look at where Democrats stand and where Democrats have new opportunities. One of the biggest focuses has been on California. Democrats thought maybe they could pick 4, maybe they could pick up 5, maybe even 6 on a great night. Where they stand right now, they've got 3 races that they're leading in, and some of them are razor thin. One of the most interesting ones, though, since we started, Katie Hill was up by about 250 votes 2 hours ago. Now she's up by about 2,500, top-tier Democratic candidate. That's something Democrats feel very good about, a pickup opportunity there. We'll have to keep an eye on how the rest of these come in over the next couple of hours, guys.
Okay, Phil, thank you very much for keeping us up to the minute. We'll check back with you. Let's bring in now David Gregory. We have Nathan Gonzalez, Anita McBride, and Jim Messina joining us. Great to have all of you here at the table with us to help us try to figure out what happened last night. So big picture, David Gregory, the fact that there's this divided result with Democrats taking the House, Republicans taking the Senate, and the fact that some things are so close, as Phil Mattingly just laid out.
Right.
What does all of this mean?
Look, I think there's revenge and there's resilience. For Democrats out of the doldrums of 2016, they took the House of Representatives back from Republican control, and they did it in a strong economy. Okay, it shows you that on the strength of that weakness for the president among suburban voters, Democrats made a strong statement. The resilience piece is that the president actually helped Republicans build on their majority in the Senate. He locked in a lot of his supporters on the back of this caravan message, on a hardline immigration stance, and the Kavanaugh factor was big. It united the Republican Party, kind of all wings of the Republican Party, in a big way. I think that's a big factor. But for both sides of that, remember, now you've got 2 years with Democrats in the House, in control, with subpoena power. They're going to make the president's life very difficult. That could be good for them. It could also be good for the president, who'll be fighting against him.
You know, Nathan, you watch these House races so closely. And the Democrats' victory, it's a pretty substantial victory, and they have some pad here. This isn't a 1 or 2 vote edge. They're getting some pad as these races come in, and we're still counting in California. I think it's amazing that we're still counting as we're now at 7:05 a.m. Eastern Time, Nathan. But what do you see here? You know, some surprises: Charleston, Oklahoma, Kansas City.
I mean, there were some, you know, it looked like Democrats' the magic number was 23. It looks like they're going to land between 30 and 35, which is a substantial number. And I think we saw Democrats win in a lot of places they should have won. I mean, you mentioned the upsets in some more Republican-leaning territory, but they won in these suburban districts where the president wasn't particularly popular, where I think the immigration message didn't play similar as well as what it did in the Senate races. And so we're seeing this sorting. And I think for Washington, when we look forward, what does it mean for Capitol Hill? You have fewer You're going to have fewer Republicans representing Democratic districts. You're going to have fewer Democratic senators representing Republican states, and there's going to be less incentive for them to work across the aisle based on their constituencies.
There's a word for that, gridlock.
Yeah.
Anita, as a Republican, what lessons do you take away from this morning?
Well, I'm really wondering now at the White House when they're waking up this morning what they're thinking about this new reality. And I'm going to be very interested to hear what the president says. I remember the day after 2006 when George W. Bush just said this was a thumping. This is not exactly a thumping, but because I think that the numbers, are obviously very good for the Democrats in the House. But what will that mean for what they can get done? Can they find something that is resonating with everybody? The prescription drug issue, I think, has been one that President Trump's been very good about talking about, and Nancy Pelosi said it last night.
So to avoid
as
gridlock,
well.
there are
to avoid
some things
gridlock,
that
find
bipartisan
something.
Progress should be able to move forward.
Find something that they can work on together. And I'd be interested to hear if the president puts out a little bit of an olive branch
He called Nancy
today.
Pelosi.
He did, which was very good. And I remember George W. Bush called her, invited her and her husband over to dinner, like right after she became the first female Speaker of the House, and Italian-American, by the way, which was great. And so, again, that sign was very important. And they tried to do something big with immigration, and
But
unfortunately
it's interesting
that
how
failed.
different that time in the country was.
Yes.
2006 really represented the left in this country mobilizing against the war in a way that
Yes.
they didn't in 2004. The winds of change were so strong at that point that it ultimately propelled Barack Obama into office. Here, I think you see this realignment where the polarization is so deep culturally, philosophically, that I think our future is a little different.
I got to say one thing. I would be shocked if the president came out and said we had a thumping in the House.
He won't.
I don't
He's
think
not.
he would.
He
I would
won't.
be shocked
And
if
he'll
there's any
take credit for everything that happened in the Senate and will probably take no
Well,
responsibility
we
for
already
the
have
losses
a tweet
in the
where he's
House.
saying
Big
that
victory.
foreign leaders are calling to congratulate him.
I know. I heard that.
He's saying the big victory side of it, which is a risk for him going forward. Not recognizing what happened to him in these House races, that's a risk. Jim, I want to bring you into this discussion, but before you address this issue, you have eyes and ears all around the country in some of these Democratic races. John Tester, we've been watching that race very, very closely. You really do think, even though he's down 1,600 votes, he's got reason to be optimistic?
Yeah, look, I'm a Montana rancher, right? My wife's sitting at the vote headquarters right now. We have enough votes in Missoula and Bozeman. John Tester will be reelected in the United States Senate. He is never gotten 50%. He's always been very close, and he will continue to be. I want to talk about 2020 for a second, because the other thing we haven't talked about is the major realignment on the blue wall states. Democrats just took the Michigan governorship, they took the Wisconsin governorship, and if you look at the results, Republicans wanted to put some of those Senate seats in play. None of those were in play. If you wake up this morning and you're Donald Trump, you look at 2020 and start to say, how does my math to 270 electoral votes look? It looks very hard if he can't, to your point, solidify some of these suburbs where he did well in 2016 and just got slaughtered in 2018.
Yeah, and think about what he's got to do on that. Is he going to moderate on immigration? I don't see him doing that.
No
if he
way.
wants to lock in this base. And by the way, I hope it's not the case, but he could be looking at an economic downturn. Certainly the market gyrations have been unsettling, right? That could hurt him because otherwise you'd want to be talking about the economy all the time.
Well, and he wants to go out and talk about the economy in the Midwestern states where they don't feel markedly better. Swing voters are still working 2.5 jobs and looking out there and saying, what are you talking about, the stock market? We don't have stock. Our life's gotten harder. The blue wall is going to be real again in 2020.
Jim, one more question for you about 2020. Where President Obama went out to campaign and hold rallies, did that help? Did that work? Will he do that again leading up to 2020?
I think it depends on where, right? People forget no Democrat had carried Virginia until Barack Obama did. It's now a blue state. We now have every single office. We've now have control of 7 complete states in legislative chambers and governorships that we didn't last night. And President and Mrs. Obama, people forget Mrs. Obama is the most popular political figure in America. They both were out there all the time. The president finished in the 3 pickup opportunities in Virginia yesterday, and we won 2 of the 3, and looks like we might win the 3rd. So he had a very good impact. I think he had a better impact in the suburbs than Donald Trump.
Nathan, you look at the turnout, 113 million voters, and it may go up from that. That's just the preliminary count we're getting. Way higher than 2014 and 2010. It's great. Yay, democracy. It's not totally clear who it helped everywhere. In a state like Florida, it may have been decisive for the Republicans.
Right. I think maybe the media got a little bit enamored with Democratic turnout and looking at lines in specific demographic groups that don't normally vote in midterm elections. But I think when you have that large of a number, your turnout was up across the board. That it wasn't just Democrats that were turning out in greater numbers; it was Republicans as well. Maybe as a reaction to what they were seeing on TV of Democrats being so enthusiastic.
And the president, does he deserve some credit for turning out these voters in the places he went? In many of the states, not all, but many of the states he went, Missouri, Tennessee, got big wins.
I think the president deserves credit for turning out everyone. He turned out Republicans for Republican candidates. He turned out Democrats for Democratic candidates. Democratic turnout wouldn't have been as high as what it was without President Trump.
Is there a polling problem, though? I mean, are we seeing a polling problem with regard to what the spreads look like? And is there a hidden Trump vote? I mean, I heard Frank Luntz say that there's 2-3% of supportive Trump numbers out there that are not showing up in polls before elections.
What's the answer, Nathan?
I actually think the polls were pretty good. I mean, the margins in Indiana were surprising. The margin in Missouri was surprising, but those were trending toward Republicans. I mean,
but you guys feel
our House and Senate projections
I think that's
are pretty
crazy.
good.
You can't look at all the Andrew Gillum numbers and think polling's okay. You can't look at the turnout estimates in some of these states. No poll figured out the turnout. No, but the turnout estimates, no one had 113 million voters, right? Once again, polls are broken, and we should stop being so focused on them and start looking at actual data. And you could start to see in the early votes that there was, to Nathan's point, real turnout on both sides. It wasn't just this blue wave that people were saying.
I will say Harry Ennis, who does our forecast for us, nailed it on the House. Really hit it exactly right on the House forecast, looking at the polls and other ratings there. On the Senate, it was well within what he said the range would be. Andrew Gillum in the CNN poll that came out last week was leading by 1 point. He lost by less than a point, so that's well within the margin of error also. Anita, I'm struck, George W. Bush, when he was president of the United States, the Republican Party was the party of the suburbs, among other places. I chased him around the country for a year, and we went to tons of suburbs. David was there. Carrying my bag. But that seems to be slipping away from the Republican Party.
And I think that President Trump has had a bit of a reluctance in accepting the fact that he is the head of the party. I mean, he actually kind of came in sort of thwarting what the Republican Party was. I mean, and to your point as well, the Kavanaugh hearings helped to galvanize a lot more Republican voters behind him. But it is changing. And to Virginia, for example, I think one of the saddest things about last night is losing one of the hardest working women in Congress, which is Barbara Comstock. I am sure Jennifer Wexton will be great, but I think that was really unfortunate. And those suburbs are changing.
The only thing you say about Trump is that, and you were the guy with the ball cap and on the laptop all the time? Yeah, no, I saw you in the corner a lot. I do think that the thing about what's different here is that Trump is the manifestation of a failure to solve the immigration problem, a reaction to, the financial crisis. He's such a different leader, obviously, than Trump, but the conditions are so much different now. All
right, guys, stand by. We have much more to talk about. And coming up on New Day, we're going to speak to some winners, including Congressman-elect Dan Crenshaw of Texas, Michigan Governor-elect Gretchen Whitmer, Congressman-elect Kendra Horn of Oklahoma, Mike Espy, who's in a runoff for Mississippi Senate, and we'll get a preview of
at least 6 seats from the GOP. Republicans managed to hold key seats in the Midwest. So CNN's Phil Mattingly is looking at all of this. He has all the up to the second election results for us. Phil.
Yeah, Allison, Democrats obviously flipping at least 6 seats. That's great news, especially given what happened to the party on the state level over the course of the prior decade or so. There's one race, though, that is particularly getting under the craw of Democrats, and that's Florida, where Andrew Gillum was considered really the future of the Democratic Party. Still could be, but he won't be doing so in the governor's mansion in Florida, losing to Ron DeSantis 49.7% to 49%. That was clearly a disappointment to a lot of Democrats I was talking to. They loved the campaign he ran, loved what he might have meant for the future. He will not be governor of Florida. There's another one. We talked about Georgia. You also need to talk about Ohio, where Mike DeWine ended up winning that race, the Republican, running about 4 points ahead of where Richard Cordray was. Democrats had their eyes on this. They did very well in the U.S. Senate race in the state of Ohio. They were not able to flip the governor's race. But here's where they were able to flip, and I think this is important to point out. When you look at Michigan, when you look at Wisconsin, where Scott Walker has been a Democratic target for what seems like years now, 2 races and a recall, they were able to flip that seat as well. Those are key pickups for Democrats and key flips as well. You flip Illinois as well. That's good news for Democrats when you look on the net. Here's the one thing that I think people are a little bit concerned about right now. They also could have had an opportunity to pick up Iowa. They weren't able to do that. In total, when you look at what they were able to do, not just because people look at these races and think, hey, 2020 statewide presidential, but what it means 2020 for redistricting, the rewriting of legislative maps, Democrats' ability to narrow the gap between governors' mansions, Republicans and Democrats by 6, maybe 7 seats is important. And John, this one's for you because I know you were very keen on this all night. Connecticut has been hanging out there, a very Democratic state, wanting to know how this was going to end up. Finally, East Hartford and Hartford have reported. We're still waiting for New Haven to come in. However, the Democrat Ned Lamont has taken a bit of a lead with 99% reporting. Looks like it's likely to stay in Democratic hands, but I'll keep a close eye on it for you.
All right, Phil Mattingly, thanks so much. Important to note, we are still counting in some races, some still very, very tight, and some big calls still to come over the next few hours. Joining us now, the chairman of the Democratic National Committee, the former Secretary of Labor, Tom Perez. Mr. Secretary, thank you so much for being with us.
Pleasure to be with you.
Is it glass half full, glass half empty, or just half?
I'm very pleased. I mean, we now have the House. I think we'll end up at about 230 seats in the House. I might be off by 1 or 2 either way. I had actually 7 flips in the governor's mansions. I had Michigan, Illinois, Wisconsin, Nevada, Kansas, New Mexico, and Maine. 4 women. Again, yesterday was clearly the year of the woman, and we saw that well. We flipped 7 state legislative chambers, and the mission of the DNC and the Democratic Party is electing Democrats up and down the ballot. And when you flip these state legislative chambers, to get back to your conversation about redistricting, that's very real. And winning in places like Wisconsin and Illinois, and then Tom Wolf won resoundingly in Pennsylvania. I mean, we're fortifying again that blue wall moving forward.
And that is a very glass half full analysis. And taking the House is a big deal. Any way you look at it, that's a big deal. However, there were some very high profile races that Democrats around the country, particularly newer voters, really wanted to win. And you look at Florida as ground zero for that. Andrew Gillum, what do you think happened?
Well, hey, I want to win every race. So, and I was down in Florida Friday, Georgia Saturday. And we have to continue to do what we're doing in the sense of organize. We were able to turn out young voters. We were able to turn out.
But why not enough? Why not enough? Given you know they were running against the president, you thought you had a good environment. Why not enough?
Well, I mean, turnout was up on both sides, and so when you look at the modeling that was in place, I mean, we turned out more voters than ever before, and we've got to keep working at it. I mean, one thing that we're going to continue to do, and I see progress both in Georgia and in Florida on this. Again, it's been, I think, 24 years since a Democrat won Florida, so it's a tall order. And in Georgia, it's been a similar amount of time.
You said you turned out a lot of voters there, and you did. Do you acknowledge, though, that the president is very successful at turning out his own voters? Is he a political force that you've figured out how to reckon with?
Well, I mean, the politics of fear that's his playbook, and the politics of fear can motivate people. There's no doubt about that. And what we have to do is continue to build these relationships with voters, not just in the 3-month run-up to an election, but 12 months a year. And that's exactly what we're doing. And we're going to continue to do that in Florida. We're going to continue to do that in Georgia. I share Stacey Abrams' concerns about the continuing efforts to make it harder for eligible people to vote, mostly people of color. And that's not who we are as a nation.
You got the House. What's priority number 1?
Health care, making sure we protect coverage for people with pre-existing conditions. A robust infrastructure bill that puts people to work in good middle-class jobs across this country, making sure that we work together with stakeholders on that. We have to make sure we invest in public education. We heard that, and we have a governor of Kansas in no small measure because under Republican leadership, Kansas starved public education, and I see that across the country. And those are 3 priorities, and we're going to work on the DREAM Act.
Where does oversight of the executive branch fit in? I spoke to Conor Lamb, your congressman from Pennsylvania. He says he doesn't really want to see the president's tax returns. How important are they?
Oh, I think oversight is important in the sense that right now, the system of checks and balances is non-existent. I mean, look at all the cabinet secretaries that have been involved in wrongdoing and not an ounce of oversight from the Republicans. I mean, that's unconscionable. This is taxpayer money that is being wasted.
So we can expect hearings?
I'm sure we'll expect hearings because we have a constitutional duty of oversight in the U.S. House. But at the same time, Your first question was very, very relevant. We're going to fight for the issues that people care about. We won the House, and we won all these governorships. And again, it's been, I think, 25 years since one side won 7 governorships in one race. And we won because we're focusing on the issues that people care
The
about.
president has a news conference at 11:30. If he reaches out his hand and says, I want to work with the Democrats, what will you say?
What Nancy Pelosi said last night, of course we want to work in a bipartisan fashion. I think we can get an infrastructure bill. I think we can, they actually, if you look at the last 2 weeks, they said they were going to protect pre-existing conditions, notwithstanding the 70 votes to repeal the Affordable Care Act. So let's take them at their word. We've talked about a DREAM Act before, and one day he was for it, one day he was against it. Will he stand up to the far right wing of his party? That remains to be seen. If he does, we can get things done.
I'm out of time. 5 seconds. Your biggest surprise last night?
The number of races that we won in areas like Oklahoma, Kansas, and elsewhere, what it shows is our investments in a 50-state strategy are working. We can win everywhere as long as we are speaking to the issues that people care about.
All right, Mr. Secretary Tom Perez, Chairman of the Democratic National Committee, thanks for coming in. Nice to see you here.
Always a pleasure.
Allison?
Okay, John, after a whirlwind 72 hours that included an insensitive Saturday Night Live joke, retired Navy SEAL Dan Crenshaw has won a seat in Congress. What does he want to do when he gets to Washington? He tells us next.
So essentially what we're seeing is Democrats will end up with 229 seats, so that's a net gain of 34. Now, obviously, they could end up at 230 or 228, but our best estimate right now is they'll end up with 229.
And that's a little bit of pad. You have a little bit of pad.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And, you know, there's all this talk about the speakership with Nancy Pelosi and Democrats who might go against her, but if they're at 229, she's pretty much guaranteed to be elected the next speaker.
And you were watching when we're talking about the outstanding races. Where are they at this point?
Most of them are in California. And so there's still a few races that might go either way, in the 25th district, the 39th district. So this can plus or minus a seat. But overall, we feel pretty confident about this estimate, given there's so few races outstanding.
All right, 229, Harriet, and you pretty much nailed the forecast that you've been making for the last several weeks on New Day. Thanks so much for being with us again.
Thanks for always having me.
You should be a meteorologist. Meanwhile, he got national attention days before the election because of an insensitive joke on Saturday Night Live. Now, former Navy SEAL Dan Crenshaw is heading to Washington as a freshman Republican in a now Democrat-controlled House. Congressman-elect Dan Crenshaw joins us now. Congratulations, Congressman-elect.
Well, thank you very much. It's great to be with you here.
I guess the SNL joke did not hurt your outcome.
No, it didn't hurt. I don't think it helped, but we've been working hard for about a year now, connecting with voters all over the district, going from restaurant to restaurant, table to table, house to house, and it's really been an incredible journey, and it paid off last night. We're pretty excited about it.
I bet you are. So what's the first thing you want to do when you get now to an even more divided Washington, given the Democrats controlling the House and the Republicans controlling the Senate?
Right. It's one challenge after another, right? Well, we have issues in Houston that are pretty bipartisan. One big one is flood mitigation infrastructure. I need to be able to work with the Army Corps of Engineers to ensure that our infrastructure can take another Hurricane Harvey-like event. That's pretty unique to Houston, of course. I'm willing to look for ways to reduce healthcare costs. In Houston, there are some great innovative companies on the pharmaceutical side, on the direct primary care side. I can't see why on earth Democrats wouldn't want to push to expand these kind of innovative free market solutions to reducing healthcare costs. So that'll be a big one for me as well.
Congressman-elect, I want to read a portion of your victory speech last night. And I'm sorry things have been happening here so quickly this morning and changing that we don't have video of it yet. So let me just read it. You say, this election and the next couple of years, and hopefully the next 50 to 100 years, is going to be about understanding what we all believe in together, understanding the foundational values that keep us together. And that used to be comedy. It used to be sports. Let's separate politics from these things. Let's enjoy life together as Americans. That's what I'd like to get back to. I think that a lot of people would like your utopian vision for getting back as Americans to enjoying life together. But let's face it, I mean, it's more divided and rhetorically more heated than ever. So what's your suggestion?
Well, you know, what I was referring to is comedy, sports. Listen, the political rhetoric will probably remain divisive. It will remain mean as ever. I'm going to try to be part of the solution there, not part of the problem. And by that, I mean, don't attack someone's core. Don't attack someone's intent if you disagree with them. And we feel, and especially on the conservative side, we feel as though every time we have a policy disagreement, the left attacks who we are. They attacked our intent as if we were bad people. On the comedy side, on the sports side, you know, my message to Hollywood, my message to sports is just allow people to take a break from politics. Please don't politicize your comedy in a way that is just mean-spirited. And that's what happened this weekend. But it happens a lot more than just that. You know, I think the American people could use a break.
And Congressman-elect, do you have that message for the president? Do you think the president plays any role in that kind of heated rhetoric?
Yeah, I would always call for him to tone down the rhetoric sometimes and lower the temperature. It would certainly help.
Yes, it would certainly help. And so, Congressman, I mean, what do you think will be able to be accomplished?
Well, like I said, I think there's a few things Democrats and Republicans can probably agree on. Infrastructure development, especially here in Houston, like I said before. What about workforce training? You know, we have 7 million job openings right now. It's a good problem to have, but we don't necessarily have the workers with the right skill sets to enter into those jobs. All right, we have maybe too many young people going into 4-year degrees, graduating, but not really having any skills to show for it, but they do have a lot of debt. There's a lot of workforce training programs out there, maybe apprenticeship programs that we can start to expand and look at ways to have public-private partnerships and get young people the skills they need to take on those jobs and earn higher wages and really make us a more productive nation.
Okay, and last, just to bring this full SNL circle, when we last spoke to you, you said that you were not demanding an apology from Pete Davidson, but you did have a suggestion for SNL, and that was to kind of pool their money and give, I think you were calling for $1 million for veterans' causes. Have you heard from Saturday Night Live?
The producers sent me an email apologizing, but I didn't hear anything about that $1 million. We're still waiting on that.
All right. Well, Congressman-elect Dan Crenshaw, thanks so much for joining us with your view of the country and what is next. Thanks so much.
Oh, thanks for having me.
John.
All right, Allison. For the first time in his presidency, Donald Trump will have to deal with a divided Congress and oversight from Democrats who will now control the House of Representatives. How do you think he'll approach that? One reporter knows. Maggie Haberman joins us next. Losing control of the House of Representatives. So how will the president deal with that? Joining us now to talk about the next few hours, the next few days, and the next few months, White House correspondent for the New York Times and CNN political analyst Maggie Haberman. Maggie, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Jeff Zeleny is reporting that the president, who's doing a news conference at 11:30, is going to come out and declare victory.
Yeah.
He's basically not going to focus at all on the change of power in the House of Representatives. That your understanding?
Oh, absolutely, and he's already been doing it. I mean, his first tweet last night was tremendous victories. He tweeted excitedly about his press conference at 11:30. It's consistent with everything we've seen from Donald Trump in his administration. It is not consistent with what presidents do when power changes hands in midterms. We saw President Obama and George W. Bush acknowledge, a thumping or a loss or a shellacking. You're not going to hear much of that. He did call Nancy Pelosi, which I thought was striking and worth taking note of, given that what we had been hearing out of the White House was, why would he do something like that? That is a recognition of reality. But I think his rhetoric today is going to be, we expanded our Senate majority, and he's got a point in terms of getting people confirmed, in terms of especially for cabinet secretary replacements. That is very good for him. What's not good for him is the reality that there is now oversight of his administration from the opposing party. The complaint about the Republican-held Congress was they weren't doing anything to fulfill their constitutional mandate as a check on executive power. It's going to be very hard for Democrats to resist, as much pressure as there will be to have some olive branch with the White House. There are going to be a lot of investigations. The president is not, I think, quite getting what that means.
Well, I was going to ask that. Does he not understand or not care that this will happen?
I just think he hasn't processed the reality. He is not of Washington, and he doesn't tend to pay attention to history. I don't think that he has really absorbed the fact that when these investigations happen, it is miserable for the White House staff. I heard from a bunch of veterans of previous administrations where there were these oversight investigations and subpoenas dropping, and it's very unpleasant for them. And I think that is what you have staff weighing today is, and across at agencies, everywhere. Do I stay or do I go?
okay, segue to turnover. Do you think how much turnover will there be and when?
So in the West Wing staff, it's a pretty depleted area already, but I do think you are going to see a lot of people leave. The big question mark is John Kelly. Most White House advisors anticipate he will not be there for the long 2020 haul, as we had heard earlier this year, although when and who replaces him is an open question. Likewise with a lot of these cabinet secretary roles, there are a bunch of people who are probably going to be gone. Jeff Sessions obviously tops the list.
Look, it's 7:46 a.m. Should I be surprised that Jeff Sessions is still the Attorney General?
No, I actually think that Jeff Sessions is going to try to be there as long as he can. I think that everybody wants to leave in a way that isn't miserable and embarrassing and, you know, being fired by tweet. I think that Jeff Sessions, recognizes that the time is running out for him. I think he will try to find a way where it can be amicable. I think that you will see Wilbur Ross potentially pushed out the door. I think that you will possibly see Ryan Zinke pushed out the door.
Those are two guys who could be under investigation by this new Democratic
Correct.
House.
I think not could be. I think likely will be. Betsy DeVos, Department of Education, another one who I think will be under investigation. You are going to see a lot of turnover. It's just not all going to be this week or next week. I think you are going to see through the end of the year a lot of changes.
So the Senate victory is absolutely an affirmation of the president's political reach in red states, and he campaigned in many of these states where Republicans have picked up seats. However, the Democrats taking a House and where they did it, in suburban districts that were traditionally Republican, now are more Democratic. Again, does the president not appreciate his role in making this switch happen?
He rejects the premise of the statement, is how I would put it. The way his argument is going to be, look at what I did, and remember, immigration was his singular focus and call. This is what he told his campaign manager to focus on, his aides to focus on. He is going to say, and they held on to governorships in Ohio and Florida. Florida in particular was a campaign that essentially Trump aides went in and ran. And so they're going to say, look at what we did. However, what his message was incredibly racially divisive. It was incredibly explosive. It was incredibly inflammatory. Sure, it works, but it is not what we have typically seen a president do. He is going to say, however, look at what I was able to do, and you are looking at a completely divided, split America.
And I'm trying to figure out what that means for the possibility, perhaps the slim possibility, of working with this new Democratic Congress. I think one of the most unusual moments of the entire presidency to date was that brief Chuck and Nancy
You were going to say
moment.
that,
Well, it was.
Yeah,
It was
no, it's
so
true.
interesting. And you
Totally
know
true.
what? He looked like he loved it.
Well,
he sounded like he loved it for that brief moment.
Sure, he did. He also likes making deals, as you know. I mean, this is his whole calling card and his whole narrative. He also personally knows Chuck and Nancy in a way that he has never had chemistry with Mitch and Paul. So it's not a huge surprise. I think that his impulse is going to be to try to pivot toward working with Democrats to the extent that he can. I think that Pelosi and the Democrats in the House are going to be under some pressure to find something that is an actual issue where they can get something done, because the risk for them is he's just going to paint them as obstructionist Democrats, and that could help him in 2020.
Infrastructure?
I mean, you know, it's always infrastructure week, right? I mean, look, he had actually been telling people in the White House for a very long time that he preferred the Senate plan anyway to his own plan. I still don't think that's actually going to happen, but I think you're going to hear the words infrastructure frequently.
Immigration.
What's the question?
Well, the question is that there is a deal to be made. I mean, there's been a deal to be made for several presidencies on immigration.
Correct.
And in this case, there's a very easy deal to be made on Dreamers if he wants to, and if the Democrats want to.
If he wants to. I think that would be the narrowest of deals. But remember, DOJ just filed to have the Supreme Court take up the DACA case. So I'm not sure how you pivot from that to let's make a deal. You could. I still think that the rhetoric of his campaign is going to make it extremely unlikely, because people are going to, unless it is a really good deal, I think the Democratic base is not going to see it well.
So now that Election Day has come and gone, in theory, it means that Robert Mueller could make some kind of public statement or have some kind of public activity. How does the White House think this will come down?
What they're expecting is that there's going to be a report in the next couple of months that he will issue to Congress. They believe, to be clear, they're reading tea leaves just as much as everybody, and Mueller's been very private about what he's doing. They believe / are wish casting that there will not be any indictments of his immediate circle, anyone in his family. A report comes out, they issue a counter report. He most likely does not sit for an interview. They answer written questions, and then they see how far they can take that.
Interesting. Robert Mueller has a little more cover with the Democratic House, perhaps, than he would.
No question.
They can have him in and others in for testimony. Maggie Haberman, really great discussion.
Nice
Thanks
to
so
see
much.
you.
Allison?
Okay, John, a record-breaking number of women ran in the midterms and won last night. CNN's Jessica Dean has more on their historic night. Take a look.
Oh my God! Tuesday brought celebrations across the U.S. for the record-breaking number of women who made history with their victories. They ran and won in unprecedented numbers, adding over 30 seats in the House. Many are Democrats inspired to run in response to President Trump.
We sent a message that we want a better nation, that we demand a better nation.
Former Navy Commander Elaine Luria turned Virginia's 2nd Congressional District blue. Like many of the women elected, she's a first-time candidate.
We've spent 2 years waiting for someone to stand up to the partisanship and the division in Washington.
29-year-old New York Democrat and self-described socialist Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez will be the youngest woman ever elected to Congress.
That all our actions, no matter how small or how large, are powerful, worthwhile, and capable of lasting change.
Diversity extended beyond their gender.
Assalamu alaikum.
2018 also saw the first Muslim women elected to serve in the House. Democrats Rashida Tlaib of Michigan and Ilhan Omar of Minnesota.
The first women to wear a hijab to represent us in Congress.
Democrat Sharice Davids from Kansas and Deb Haaland of New Mexico earned their place in history, becoming the first Native American women in Congress.
I think representation is important. I think diversity is important. Every voice deserves a seat at the table.
Democrats made it a priority to get more women to that table in 2018, but Republican women made their mark Tuesday night, too. Republican Congresswoman Marsha Blackburn supports President Trump, who returned the favor, stumping for her multiple times. Blackburn will become the first female senator from Tennessee.
Now you don't have to worry if you're going to call me Congressman or Congresswoman or Congress lady. Now, Senator will do.
Republican Congresswoman Kristi Noem will now answer to governor, becoming the first woman in South Dakota to do so.
It wasn't all good news for women. Incumbent Democratic Senators Claire McCaskill and Heidi Heitkamp lost their seats in high-profile races. But Tuesday marked a turning point as the congressional representation of women got a little closer to matching the percentage of women in America. John and Allison?
Closer. Yeah.
But it's still a long way to go.
Well, sure, but more women are engaged as well. I mean, more women, even for 2020, are in the mix at lower levels. I mean, I've gone to some of these campaign schools where they have record number of women signing up to learn how to become candidates and get involved in the political.
And one of the things we heard overnight is that's a difference this time around, is that women are volunteering. Women are going to seek races as opposed to having to be found and dragged into it.
Yeah, just really fascinating. Just one of the many historic things that we saw last night. So President Trump will hold a press conference just hours from now. He faces a new reality this morning. It is a divided Congress. We'll have White House counselor Kellyanne Conway with us live next.